Never show all your cards. Conceal your intentions. Machiavelli believed that the most powerful move isn't force. It's control. Not of others, but of perception. When people believe they understand you, when they think they know what you want, that's when you strike. Not with violence, but with silence, patience, and precision. This isn't manipulation, it's survival in a world where motives are rarely pure and power rarely obvious. And for anyone who's ever been betrayed, underestimated, or overlooked, you know exactly what he meant. Welcome to 3 hours of psychological warfare strategies from Machiavelli. In this video, we explore the timeless techniques of the Renaissance's most misunderstood strategist, from disarming enemies without lifting a finger to mastering the art of subtle dominance in every room you walk into. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and comment below which philosopher you'd like us to dive into next. Conceal your true intentions until the final moment. Machiavelli famously argued that power is often not taken. It's surrendered, but only to those who've mastered the art of concealment. To conceal your true intentions means more than simply keeping secrets. It means managing perception so skillfully that others genuinely believe they understand your agenda, when in truth, they're only seeing the surface of a deeper strategy. This approach plays directly into human nature. Most people are eager to interpret and explain the behaviors of others. When you give them just enough to build their own story, they do the rest for you, creating illusions of trust, an alliance, or even superiority. But if you expose your true objective too early, you surrender your power. You allow others time to prepare, resist, or manipulate you in return. In negotiations, warfare, or leadership, revealing your full plan too soon invites countermeasures. It stirs anxiety, opposition, or jealousy. People begin plotting, even subconsciously. Machiavelli knew this well. In The Prince, he praised historical leaders who disguised their motivations until the final hour. Their ability to mask ruthlessness beneath charm allowed them to rise above rivals who were too transparent, too predictable. In modern terms, think of a boardroom negotiation. If you walk in declaring your bottom line, you've already lost leverage. But if you present partial truths, alternate priorities, or even misdirect entirely, you gain time to study reactions, adapt your approach, and strike when the opposition is off balance. This isn't dishonesty, it's strategic discretion. Machiavelli would advise, don't just play the game. Control the board by never letting anyone fully read your next move. This doesn't mean lying outright. In fact, total lies often unravel. But framing your story, withholding detail, or emphasizing distractions while pursuing a deeper goal allows you to guide outcomes with minimal resistance. Even in personal relationships, this principle applies. Consider how much smoother influence becomes when the other person doesn't feel controlled. Influence, when invisible, feels like freedom. You allow them to think the idea was theirs, the decision mutual, the benefit shared. But deep down, your hidden hand was always steering the course. The danger of premature transparency isn't just external, it can also harm internal confidence. Once you've made your plan public, you may feel boxed in, forced to follow through even if conditions change. Concealment, by contrast, gives you strategic flexibility. You can shift, evolve, or abandon your plan without losing face or trust. To implement this principle, always ask, what do they think I want? What do I actually want? How can I bridge the two without revealing the difference? Remember, your intentions are currency, and like all valuable things, they're safest when protected. Share only what serves your aim, and only when the outcome is already in motion. By the time they realize what you've done, it will already be too late to stop you. inspire fear more than love, but never hatred. Machiavelli's most controversial principle, and one of his most quoted, is his assertion that it is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. This advice, while provocative, is rooted in a clear-eyed understanding of human behavior. It doesn't mean being cruel for its own sake. Instead, it reflects the idea that respect rooted in fear is more stable than affection rooted in love, provided it does not tip into hatred. Fear compels obedience. Love invites hope. But love, Machiavelli warned, is fickle. It's based on shared ideals, kindness, and emotions, all things that can waver in the face of adversity. Fear, however, is grounded in self-preservation, and for most people, that's the most powerful motivator. People may walk away from someone they love, but they hesitate to cross someone they fear. Still, the balance is delicate. Inspire too much fear, and it breeds hatred, which can spark rebellion or sabotage. This is why Machiavelli made the distinction. Be feared, but never hated. The key lies in discipline and control. A ruler or leader or boss who is consistent, fair in punishment, and quick to reward loyalty can maintain fear without cruelty. People come to respect boundaries even if they do not like them. Let's ground this in real-world terms. Imagine a corporate leader. The loved leader may be popular, friendly, and approachable. But when tough decisions need to be made, like layoffs, budget cuts, or enforcing accountability, this leader may hesitate, fearing backlash. The feared leader, on the other hand, commands a certain seriousness. When they speak, people listen. When they act, others adapt. Their presence carries weight. They may not be loved, but they are not ignored, and that difference is crucial in high-stakes environments. But how do you avoid becoming hated? Machiavelli advises, act with purpose, not malice. Punish only when necessary, and ensure your punishments are swift, decisive, and clearly justified. Avoid lingering cruelty or public humiliation. Show that your harshness protects order, not ego, and above all, give people stability. If your rule creates safety, even if it comes with fear, people will endure it, even respect it. You must also build a foundation of competence. Fear alone cannot sustain power. If you're feared and seen as effective, someone who gets results, protects the group, and enforces justice, you'll be tolerated, even admired. But if you're feared and seen as incompetent or cruel for personal gain, resentment festers quickly. Machiavelli's advice here is not about being a tyrant. It's about understanding the psychology of power. Leaders who try to please everyone often please no one. Those who demand respect, enforce order, and deliver results may not be beloved, but they are followed. So ask yourself, do people respect your decisions or just your personality? Are you leading through warmth or through the stability you create? If push comes to shove, do people comply out of admiration or fear of consequence? Fear is a durable tool when wielded with intelligence and restraint. Let love season your leadership, but let fear anchor it. Appear virtuous even when your actions are not. Machiavelli, in The Prince, emphasized one of the most unsettling but effective principles of psychological warfare. It is not necessary to be virtuous, only to appear so. This distinction between appearance and reality is not just cynical advice. It is a weapon, especially in a world where people judge quickly and rarely look beneath the surface. Why does appearance matter more than truth? Because perception shapes power. If people believe you are honest, compassionate, and just, they are far more likely to trust your leadership, accept your decisions, and dismiss any rumors or doubts about your motives. But if you reveal your darker calculations, even if your intentions are noble, you open yourself to criticism, suspicion, and rebellion. Machiavelli lived in a world of shifting loyalties, fragile alliances, and hidden daggers. In such a world, being actually moral didn't always keep you alive, but being seen as moral gave you the public trust needed to maneuver, manipulate, and survive. It's not about hypocrisy, it's about strategic illusion. Think of this like a mask. When you wear the mask of virtue, people assume the best. They fill in the blanks with kindness, loyalty, and benevolence, even if your real intentions are more ruthless. You may be maneuvering a rival out of a position of power, but if done with enough charm and grace, others will call it wise restructuring. If you remove a threat behind closed doors, but follow it with a generous public act, the act becomes the story, not the purge. Historical and modern leaders alike have mastered this. They speak of unity while dividing. They preach sacrifice while protecting their own interests. They promise transparency while concealing their truest motives. And often, and it works, because people want to believe. They're drawn to leaders who mirror their values, even if it's just an illusion. But here's the catch. To pull this off, you can't fake it poorly. The performance must be subtle, consistent, and emotionally convincing. Your tone, your words, your gestures, all must align with the virtues you claim. You don't say, "I'm honest." You let others say it. You don't boast of generosity. You orchestrate moments where others witness it. Machiavelli's brilliance lies in this paradox. He tells us that deception can be moral if it protects stability, order, or your greater goals. That doesn't mean being evil, it means being strategic. People forgive leaders who lie if they feel safe, respected, or inspired. But they turn on leaders who act virtuously but look suspicious. In a strange twist, the illusion often matters more than the deed. So, if you're navigating power, leadership, or conflict, remember this. Reputation is armor. Craft it, protect it, and when necessary, fake it brilliantly. Strike hard and decisively. Hesitation invites resistance. One of the clearest lessons from Machiavelli's writings is this: power hates hesitation. In times of crisis, conflict, or change, the worst thing a leader can do is appear unsure. Weakness invites opposition. Delay gives your enemies time to regroup, analyze, and resist. But decisive, bold action, that paralyzes them. It creates shock, confusion, and fear, all of which can be used to cement your authority. Machiavelli believed that fortune favors those who act swiftly. He used metaphors like storms and floods. When they come, they reshape the land not by asking permission, but by sheer force. A decisive strike is the psychological equivalent. It overwhelms opposition before it has a chance to form a defense. This doesn't mean reckless behavior. Machiavelli was a tactician, not a gambler. The preparation happens behind the scenes. You gather intelligence. You assess the battlefield. You identify your threats. But once the time comes to act, you do so without hesitation, without apology, and without leaving room for doubt. Why is this effective? Because people are wired to follow strength. When someone moves confidently, others assume they have reasons to be confident. Even if the move seems bold or harsh, many will follow simply because they assume there's a bigger plan. Meanwhile, those who oppose you are caught in a dilemma. Speak out and risk isolation, or stay silent and protect themselves. History is full of examples. Great generals don't ask for votes before advancing. Business leaders who reshape industries don't wait for consensus. Even in personal relationships or negotiations, the person who takes action first, who ends the silence, who makes the offer, who sets the boundary, often controls the terms of the exchange. But it's not just the act, it's how you do it. A decisive strike must be clean, final, undeniable. If you're removing a threat, don't chip away at them. Remove them in one calculated move. If you're shifting a policy or taking a stand, do it with clarity. Half measures invite challenge. Full measures shut the door. Machiavelli also understood the emotional impact. A swift and bold move doesn't just remove your rival. It terrifies others into compliance. The key is to be firm, but not cruel. Swift, but not reckless. The goal is not to make enemies, but to make an example. And remember, hesitation is its own message. When you stall, when you second-guess, when you try to please everyone, you create the perception of weakness. People sense it. They talk. They begin to test your boundaries. And once resistance grows, it becomes harder to control, like fire on dry grass. So if you want to dominate the field, whether it's in leadership, negotiation, or survival, make your move like thunder. Not with endless discussion, but with a decision that speaks for itself. Machiavelli knew, if you wait too long, your enemies will decide for you. Be the first to strike. Be the last to fall. Use enemies against one another. One of Machiavelli's most cunning psychological strategies is to use enemies against one another. This tactic isn't simply about pitting people against each other for chaos' sake. It's about turning conflict into leverage. It's about manipulating rivalries, egos, and divisions to weaken opposition and consolidate your own position without lifting a sword. At the core of this strategy is a deep understanding of human nature. People are territorial, prideful, and often driven more by competition with peers than by loyalty to a larger cause. Machiavelli knew that if you can identify existing tensions, subtle or overt, between your adversaries, you can exploit them to fracture their unity. When your enemies are distracted by their own infighting, you're free to move, plan, and strike without resistance. Let's break it down with a historical lens. During the Renaissance, Italian city-states were constantly at odds. Machiavelli, as a diplomat in Florence, observed how alliances often crumbled from the inside due to mistrust, personal ambition, and conflicting agendas. His advice? Don't just fight your enemies, turn them against each other. Help one side believe the other is gaining too much power. Offer limited support to both, keeping them hopeful but unsure. Encourage paranoia by feeding selective truths or rumors. Do this carefully, and both sides will begin to view each other as a greater threat than you. There's a timeless truth in this. Whether in politics, business, or even social circles, rivalries create openings. In modern corporate environments, for example, two departments competing for budget or influence can be subtly encouraged to focus on each other's weaknesses. By playing the neutral party or the ally to both, you can position yourself as the calm, competent figure who rises above the chaos, earning trust and authority from superiors while your rivals burn resources fighting each other. But be warned, this isn't about overt sabotage. Machiavellian strategy depends on subtlety. You don't incite war, you tilt the board. You might leak just enough information to stir jealousy. You might highlight how one rival is gaining favor, then show the other how it might hurt them. And sometimes you can fabricate a common enemy that diverts attention entirely, making two rivals compete for your alliance instead of attacking you. It's a delicate dance. You must remain above suspicion and never be seen as the puppet master. If people suspect you're the source of division, they'll unite against you. But if done right, you can destroy coalitions from the inside without firing a shot. Ultimately, using enemies against one another is about turning the human tendency for competition into a weapon. It's psychological warfare at its finest, invisible, effective, and deeply manipulative. And in a world where trust is rare and ambition is rampant, it remains as powerful today as it was 500 years ago. Be unpredictable to keep others off balance. Predictability, Machiavelli might argue, is the first stage of defeat. When people can anticipate your actions, they can neutralize your power. They build defenses, set traps, and chip away at your influence. But when you are unpredictable, truly strategically inconsistent, you create fear, confusion, and hesitancy in those around you. They second guess. They pause. And that pause is your advantage. Being unpredictable is not about being erratic or foolish. It's not about chaos for its own sake. It's about controlled unpredictability, doing the unexpected with purpose, not at random. Machiavelli believed this was one of the most effective psychological weapons in any leader's arsenal. Consider the battlefield. A general who always marches at dawn, attacks from the front, or never retreats is easy to prepare for. But a general who attacks at night one day, then holds position the next, or feigns weakness before a devastating strike, that general spreads fear and instability long before the first arrow flies. The enemy can't build a strategy if they don't know yours. This also applies far beyond war. In politics, diplomacy, and leadership, those who are unpredictable create an aura of dominance. Think of the leader who praises someone publicly only to cut their funding the next week, or the manager who is warm and generous in one meeting, then cold and clinical in the next. These shifts, when calculated and restrained, build psychological tension. Subordinates and rivals start to walk on eggshells. They give you more power than you ask for, simply because they don't know what you'll do next. There is also an emotional layer. Human beings crave certainty. When you deny it to them, they become anxious. And anxious people make mistakes. They overreact, become paranoid, or try to guess your next move instead of staying grounded. That's exactly what you want. While others waste energy anticipating you, you can observe, adapt, and strike where they're weakest. Machiavelli also understood that unpredictability breaks patterns, and with it, expectations. If you're a leader who is always conciliatory, try being aggressive in one critical moment. If you're known for being silent, speak boldly when no one expects it. These reversals aren't random. They're calculated disruptions of other people's mental models. They make others question not only your behavior, but their own judgment. And when people doubt themselves, they defer to whoever seems more certain, even if that person is you. But again, unpredictability must be used like a blade, not a hammer. Too much, and people will stop trusting or following you altogether. The goal isn't to appear unstable. It's to seem capable of anything. Keep your foundation consistent, your competence, your results, but let your methods surprise. In the end, to be unpredictable is to make yourself untouchable. Others may try to prepare, to predict, to corner you, but you'll always be one move ahead, not because you're faster, but because you're unknowable. And in the realm of power, being unknowable is often the most terrifying strength of all. Build alliances with those you plan to weaken. Machiavelli understood a simple truth about power. The closer someone is to you, the easier they are to dismantle. One of his most chilling but effective strategies is to build alliances with those you eventually intend to weaken or destroy. This is not mere hypocrisy, it's tactical intimacy. By forming an alliance, you gain trust, visibility into their operations, access to their weaknesses, and influence over their decisions. It's like being invited into a fortress as a guest, only to later open the gates from the inside. When you ally with someone, especially someone strong, you appear to submit or cooperate. You disarm them emotionally and politically. People rarely suspect betrayal from an ally. Betrayal typically comes from outside forces, or so they believe, But Machiavelli teaches that betrayal from within is far more effective and far more damaging. In modern terms, this could mean joining forces with a rival executive in a company, collaborating with a competitor in a joint venture, or even befriending someone whose influence you'd rather diminish. While they see unity, you're mapping the terrain. While they're showing goodwill, you're documenting their pressure points. But here's where it becomes genius. You don't strike right away. You build shared victories. You help them succeed. You let them grow dependent on you. You become indispensable. All the while, they begin to lower their guard. They may even begin to doubt their own instincts if others warn them about you. But he's been loyal, they'll say. She helped us through that deal, they'll argue. The longer the alliance, the deeper the roots. And then, when you've gathered enough leverage and your influence inside their circle is unshakable, you begin the erosion. Not publicly, not with a declaration. You don't attack the castle. You rot its foundation. You might sabotage key decisions subtly, push them toward risky moves, leak minor information that leads to outsized consequences. Or you might simply plant seeds of doubt among their allies, whisper to their team members, nudge their supporters, make them look unstable, erratic, distrustful. When the moment comes to sever the alliance, it's not you who looks treacherous. It's them who looks weak or incapable. And by then, you've positioned yourself as the more stable alternative, the new center of gravity. Their decline looks like a natural consequence, not the result of your design. This is why Machiavelli warned, the most dangerous enemy is often the one who once stood beside you. In politics, war, or business, true conquest comes not through force, but through influence. And the best way to influence someone is to stand next to them, just long enough to learn where to twist the knife. Exploit others' weaknesses as if they were your own weapons. Machiavelli believed that human beings, no matter how powerful, are full of cracks. Emotional, intellectual, moral, even physical. These are not flaws to overlook. They are weapons waiting to be picked up by the cunning. To truly dominate someone, you don't overpower their strengths. You manipulate their weaknesses until they become the architects of their own downfall. First, identify those weaknesses. This is reconnaissance, not judgment. Everyone has soft spots: insecurity, vanity, guilt, addiction, fear of obscurity, hunger for recognition, need for control. You observe them in speech, behavior, overreaction, or silence. For example, someone who constantly boasts about their independence might secretly crave approval. A leader who micromanages may be terrified of being exposed as incompetent. A colleague obsessed with credit might fall apart when they're ignored. Once the weakness is identified, you integrate it into your strategy. You don't attack it directly. That would be crude and obvious. Instead, you design the game so that their flaw plays into your advantage. Let's say someone can't resist flattery. You feed it to them, consistently and subtly. This earns their trust. Now, when you need them to make a foolish decision or overextend themselves, they will do so, because they're chasing that same validation. Or imagine a rival who can't stand losing face. You draw them into a confrontation they can't afford to lose, knowing their pride will override reason. They strike too hard, too soon, and you're ready. Machiavelli knew the best traps are the ones people set for themselves. That's why he advocated exploiting flaws invisibly. Make people think their downfall is their own mistake, or bad luck, or sabotage from someone else. You remain in the shadows, guiding events but never implicated. In personal relationships, this can manifest in more subtle ways. You can make someone feel needed, indispensable, when in fact they're being used. Their desire to help or to be admired becomes your control lever. You extract favors, secrets, or loyalty. and they feel good doing it. This strategy requires patience, precision, and emotional discipline. You must never reveal that you see their weakness. Never mock it. Never react to it. Instead, treat it as part of their operating system, something you program around until they function exactly as you need them to. To some, this sounds cold, but Machiavelli wasn't writing fairy tales. He was describing how power actually works. In a world where few people truly know themselves, the person who understands others' blind spots holds the map to the battlefield. Exploit those weaknesses as if they were your own weapons, because once you understand someone's flaw better than they do, it already belongs to you. Keep people dependent on your favor. One of the most effective forms of control isn't overt force, it's dependency. Machiavelli understood that real power isn't about constant domination. It's about making people feel like they need you to survive, succeed, or thrive. Whether you're a ruler, a manager, a partner, or a parent, the key to long-term influence lies in keeping others tethered to your goodwill. Dependency is more than just making others rely on your resources. It's about weaving yourself into the architecture of their lives. You want people to look at you and see security, to see advancement, to see protection. And once they associate their well-being with your presence, they become far less likely to rebel or walk away, not because you threaten them, but because they believe they can't afford to lose you. Machiavelli didn't promote kindness for its own sake. He promoted strategic generosity. You offer just enough to bind people to you, but not enough to make them self-sufficient. If you're a leader, give opportunity, but keep the gate. If you're in business, be the person who makes things happen, but never give away your full method. Let others feel empowered, but not independent. He warned that giving too much freedom to others, especially subordinates or rivals, often invites betrayal. Once someone believes they can rise without you, they'll begin to resent your authority. Dependency curbs that instinct. They may be ambitious, but if they know they can't outgrow you, they'll focus on loyalty instead of rebellion. This strategy also works by subtly reinforcing gratitude. When people rely on you for their status, income, or even emotional security, they'll often rationalize your flaws and overlook your control, because confronting it would be too destabilizing. This creates a psychological loop where they defend their dependence rather than challenge it. But Machiavelli also cautioned, never make your control feel oppressive. If someone feels trapped, they will eventually resist. The art lies in making them choose to stay. Frame your power as beneficial, present your guidance as wisdom. Let them believe that proximity to you improves them, even when it limits them. This tactic is why many historical rulers kept their closest advisors indebted or politically vulnerable. It's why corporate CEOs reward employees just enough to keep them loyal, but not rich enough to leave. It's why Machiavelli praised Cesare Borgia for placing men in power only when their success depended entirely on him. In today's world, this plays out in professional relationships, friendships, and even family structures. If you want enduring power, don't just lead, embed yourself in others' stability. Make your presence a requirement, not an option. As Machiavelli might say, if they need you, they'll follow you. If they don't, they'll forget you. Control the narrative. Perception is power. In every power game, from palace intrigue to boardroom politics, the truth is often irrelevant. What matters most is what people believe. Machiavelli understood this long before modern public relations or political spin existed. He knew that controlling the narrative meant controlling the battlefield without ever raising a sword. People act based on perception. They vote based on it, invest based on it, even fall in love because of it. Perception builds reputations, drives fear, invites trust, or sparks rebellion. That's why controlling how people see you, your decisions, your rivals, and your values is far more powerful than simply telling the truth. A prince, Machiavelli wrote, must appear merciful, faithful, humane, upright, and religious, even when he is none of those things. Because people don't see your heart, they see your performance. And if you master the performance, you shape the response. To control the narrative, you must become a master of timing, symbols, and story. Timing means revealing information when it benefits you most, and withholding it when it doesn't. Symbols mean wrapping your power in imagery that resonates with people. Flags, rituals, language, even clothes. And story means creating a version of events where you always appear as the hero, the protector, the visionary, even when you're actually consolidating power or suppressing dissent. Consider political leaders who stage dramatic moments of charity or triumph while covering up corruption, or corporations that rebrand themselves as sustainable while outsourcing to polluting factories. These aren't anomalies. They're modern Machiavellianism at work. Control the story, and you control the reaction. Machiavelli also warned that your enemies will try to define you if you don't define yourself first. Never let a vacuum form around your image. If you're silent, others will fill in the gaps, and not in your favor. That's why proactive storytelling is crucial. You don't wait for people to wonder about your motives. You give them a polished version up front. This applies not only to rulers, but to everyday life. In relationships, your narrative might be that you're the dependable one. At work, it might be that you're the innovator. The trick is, live just enough of the image to make it believable, but never confuse it with your reality. The persona is a weapon. The person is the strategist. And perhaps most importantly, Machiavelli knew that perception could be used to hide failure. If you stumble, reframe it. Turn defeat into sacrifice. Make loss look like long-term planning. People fear failure, but they admire resilience, even when it's an illusion. So, what's the takeaway? In war, politics, business, and life, truth doesn't win. Belief does. Influence the way people see you, and you influence what they do for you, or against you. After all, as Machiavelli might whisper, power doesn't reside in truth. It resides in what people think is true. Use cruelty wisely. In one swift blow, not repeatedly. Machiavelli's stance on cruelty was never about sadism or indulgence in violence. Rather, it was about effectiveness and efficiency in asserting power. In The Prince, he advises that cruelty, if necessary, must be executed once, decisively, and then never again. Repeated cruelty leads to resentment. A swift, sharp blow, however, instills fear and sets boundaries without fostering prolonged hatred. This strategy stems from a deep understanding of human psychology. When cruelty is predictable or prolonged, it becomes personal. People begin to feel oppressed, humiliated, and driven to rebellion. But when harshness comes all at once and then stops, it shocks the system, creates fear, but also provides closure. There's pain, yes, but there's also a signal. This is the end. Submit, and there will be no more harm. A powerful historical example lies in Cesare Borgia, one of Machiavelli's favorite case studies. When Borgia took power in Romagna, the region was lawless, with feuding families and banditry. To restore order, Borgia installed a ruthless governor, Ramiro de Orco. Orco used brutal force to bring the region under control. Heads were displayed in the streets. The violence was shocking, but effective. And then, once order had been restored, Borgia did something genius. He executed Orco, publicly. He distanced himself from the cruelty while benefiting from it. The people rejoiced, seeing Borgia as just and merciful. he gained fear and favor in one move. Machiavelli admired this not for its brutality, but for its clarity and timing. It proved his point. Cruelty, when used surgically and swiftly, can prevent worse outcomes. It can stop wars, silence rebellion, or secure a throne, all while minimizing the long-term resentment that constant oppression breeds. In modern terms, this could apply to leadership, corporate strategy, or even personal boundaries. Imagine a CEO making budget cuts. If cuts are made gradually over months, employees remain in a state of anxiety. Trust erodes. But if the CEO makes all necessary cuts at once, painful, yes, the uncertainty is removed. People adapt faster. The message is, we've done what had to be done. Now we move forward. This approach hinges on decisiveness and finality. It's not about being harsh. It's about being strategic when tough decisions must be made. People are surprisingly resilient. They can accept cruelty if it appears necessary, short-lived, and followed by stability. But once cruelty becomes a habit, once it's repeated, it loses its strategic value and becomes poison. Even tyrants fall this way. Repeated cruelty erodes legitimacy. It creates enemies who will wait years, decades, for revenge. So Machiavelli's advice is cold but insightful. If you must be cruel, do it once, do it hard, and then become the model of restraint. Let them fear your potential, not your repetition. That is true power. Let others do the dirty work. You collect the praise. There is a certain elegance in letting others wield the knife while you wear the crown. Machiavelli understood that power is not just about control. It's about optics. When unpopular actions must be taken, smart rulers delegate the blame but retain the rewards. This principle appears over and over again in political history. Leaders who last are often those who remain untouched by controversy, even when they orchestrate it. They know how to position loyal subordinates to act as lightning rods, absorbing public backlash while the leader remains distant, even sympathetic. Again, we return to Cesare Borgia. When he needed to restore order in Romagna, he knew that brutal measures would be necessary. Rather than sully his own hands, he employed Ramiro de Orco, a man known for his harsh rule. Orco carried out arrests, executions, and violent suppression. The people feared him and hated him. Then, once peace had been restored, Borgia had Orco executed, publicly, dramatically. The people, relieved and grateful, transferred their hatred to Orco and their admiration to Borgia. Borgia became the hero who freed them from tyranny he had sanctioned. The brilliance here isn't in deception for its own sake. It's in understanding that people crave narratives of justice, of balance. They want to believe their ruler is good. By scapegoating, a leader can give the public the villain they need, while appearing righteous themselves. We see this in corporate structures as well. A company announces a deeply unpopular restructuring. Jobs are lost. Morale drops. But the CEO, smiling at a press conference, attributes it to decisions made by departmental leadership. When things improve, the CEO takes the credit for tough but necessary reforms. And on a personal level, in office politics, in community hierarchies, the principle is the same. If you can delegate the painful task, let someone else say no. Enforce discipline, or make the hard calls. You maintain your likability and authority. When success follows, it's your strategy that's remembered. But this strategy comes with a warning. Choose your agents carefully. They must be effective, but also expendable. Once their usefulness ends, they must either be removed or neutralized. This is cold logic, but Machiavelli believed sentimentality weakens a ruler. Loyalty should be rewarded only when it aligns with utility. A secondary benefit of this approach is deniability. If things go wrong, the leader can say, "It was never my intent." If they go well, the leader steps forward and reaps the praise. The subordinate becomes both a shield and a sword. This strategy isn't about cowardice. It's about control. It's about shaping perception while protecting your reputation. Let others absorb the cost of action. You remain the architect, the wise leader who somehow always stays clean, while your vision moves forward. That is psychological warfare at its finest. Use silence to provoke insecurity. Silence, in Machiavellian terms, is not absence. It's a calculated presence. A weapon so subtle, so disarming, that many don't even recognize they've been attacked. When used deliberately, silence becomes one of the most psychologically effective tactics in warfare. Personal, professional, political. Why? Because the human mind is hardwired to fill in the blanks, and in the absence of explanation, it fills them with doubt, fear, and projection. In a world addicted to constant communication, strategic silence creates discomfort. People expect responses. They rely on feedback loops, whether in conversations, negotiations, or emotional exchanges. When that loop is broken, they begin to question. Did I say something wrong? Are they angry? Are they planning something? This internal questioning often spirals, creating a state of self-inflicted anxiety. Machiavelli understood this long before digital silence was even possible. He saw how powerful leaders could rattle their enemies simply by refusing to respond. He noted how ambassadors would grow uneasy when court responses were delayed. This principle scales up and down, from empire building to one-on-one relationships. Consider how silence operates in a negotiation. You present an offer. The room goes quiet. No nods, no pushback, just measured, unreadable silence. The other party grows uneasy. Did they offend? Was it too much? Are they about to walk? In that tension, people often lower their price, adjust their terms, or start second-guessing their own position, all because silence made them doubt themselves. The tactic also works on a more emotional plane. If someone wrongs you, and instead of lashing out or explaining yourself, you withdraw in complete silence, the weight of the unknown begins to crush them. They replay events. They seek clues. They often apologize not for what they did, but because they can't stand not knowing how you feel. This isn't about being passive-aggressive. It's about using absence as a mirror, letting others see themselves, their assumptions, their fears. When you remove your reaction, you remove their target. They're left to battle their own uncertainty, and often they will overcorrect just to restore equilibrium. But this strategy only works when your silence is intentional. Aimless withdrawal is apathy. Tactical silence is restraint. You have to read the moment. Too much silence and you risk becoming irrelevant. Too little and you've surrendered your advantage. The key is precision. Say less than necessary and make what you do say count even more. In leadership, this means resisting the urge to immediately comfort or explain. Let your silence draw out the truth from others. In arguments, don't always defend yourself. Let people feel the absence of your approval. Let them sit in it. If your presence is valuable, your silence will be deafening. And remember, silence is not weakness. It's a signal that you are in control, not just of the conversation, but of yourself. The person who can sit in silence comfortably holds the real power. Because in the game of psychological warfare, those who can wait without anxiety often defeat those who cannot. Appear generous, but give little. Generosity is one of the most deceptive tools in the Machiavellian arsenal. Why? Because it's irresistible. People want to believe you're giving without expecting anything in return. They associate giving with goodness, with virtue. But Machiavelli warned, true power lies not in how much you give, but in how well you craft the illusion of generosity, while preserving your resources. He argued that rulers who are truly generous with their time, energy, or wealth often do so at great cost to their stability. A prince who constantly gives away land or gold weakens his treasury. One who pardons too freely risks undermining authority. And a leader who lavishes others with praise too often eventually makes it meaningless. Instead, Machiavelli advises to appear generous, strategically, selectively, publicly, but in truth give far less than people believe. This tactic works because perception, not reality, shapes loyalty. If people feel they've received your favor, whether through compliments, small financial gestures, or symbolic actions, they become attached. Their gratitude often far outweighs the actual value of the gift. A public thank you, a rare meeting, a timely favor. These cost little but buy enormous emotional capital. Here's where the strategy becomes psychological warfare. When you control when and how you give, you control when others feel seen, validated, or rewarded. People begin to crave your approval because they see it as scarce, not cheap. You create dependency without ever making them feel indebted. The less you give, the more they value it. Consider how this plays out in business. A CEO who hands out bonuses too frequently is expected to keep doing so. But one who gives selectively, after major milestones or when morale is lowest, creates a myth around their generosity. Employees remember that one gesture for years. Meanwhile, the company's resources remain largely intact. The same holds true in personal relationships. Constant gifts or sacrifices can backfire. They may breed entitlement or worse, suspicion. But a well-timed act of generosity, especially when it seems spontaneous, cements trust and deepens emotional loyalty. It creates a sense of being chosen, of being special. Machiavelli would remind us, don't flood the room with light. Cast a spotlight. Make each gesture count. Let others talk about your generosity more than you actually practice it. And behind the scenes, keep your coffers full and your boundaries firm. This strategy also inoculates you against manipulation. When you give too freely, others begin to test your limits. They push, they expect, but when you control your giving, when it's earned, not assumed, you define the terms of engagement. So ask yourself, who praises you for what you haven't even given? Who waits for your favor instead of taking it for granted? And are you building influence through generosity or spending your power trying to please? To appear generous but give little is not cruelty. It's economic elegance in the realm of psychology. You win by giving less and meaning more. Mirror your enemy to manipulate them. Machiavelli understood a timeless truth. The best way to manipulate someone is to make them feel understood, even familiar. And one of the most effective psychological strategies to do this is mirroring. Not just repeating words or gestures, but reflecting your enemy's tone, rhythm, body language, worldview, even their moral language, back at them. When done subtly, it disarms them. It lowers their guard. It makes them believe you are like them. And people don't fight what they think they understand. They confide in it. In psychological warfare, this tactic is brilliant because it works on both conscious and unconscious levels. When you reflect someone's behavior or emotional state, they experience a strange comfort, a sense of safety. They begin to relax, to trust, to open up. But more importantly, they stop seeing you as a threat. Mirroring isn't about mimicking. It's about adapting, understanding how your enemy thinks, speaks, and reacts, and then subtly aligning your posture, words, and emotions with theirs. If they are aggressive and blunt, you meet them with toughness. If they're reserved and logical, You respond with reason and calm. The goal is not to please them, it's to build rapport while staying in control. This tactic works in politics, negotiation, warfare, even personal conflict. Let's say you're in a heated business rivalry. Your opponent is defensive, proud, and believes they're smarter than you. You don't challenge that belief directly. You feed it. You let them feel superior. You mirror their pride, even echo some of their views. They'll feel validated, maybe even generous. And while they're busy enjoying their reflection, you're observing their weaknesses, their blind spots, their tells. Mirroring can also create confusion, a powerful tool. When an adversary sees their own tactics reflected back at them, they hesitate. They question their next move. Is he thinking like me? Did he predict this? Suddenly, their confidence falters. They're unsure if they're leading or being led. That psychological hesitation can give you the space to strike. Machiavelli would say, "Know your enemy and then become them until they no longer know themselves." But here's the warning. If you overdo it, it becomes obvious. And once people realize they're being mirrored, they feel manipulated, and the trust breaks instantly. This strategy only works when it's invisible. It must feel natural, not scripted. That's why it's a high-level tactic. It requires emotional intelligence, timing, and restraint. Ultimately, mirroring is not about flattery. It's about infiltration. You enter your enemy's mental space. You let them think they're dealing with someone familiar. And while they're talking to the version of themselves you've projected, you're positioning yourself to win. Flatter egos to distract from your intentions. Few weapons are more universally effective or more underestimated than flattery. Machiavelli understood the ego not as a weakness, but as a doorway. And if you want to control the strong, influence the powerful, or soften the suspicious, you don't confront their ego. You inflate it. When someone believes they're respected, admired, even worshipped, they drop their guard. Their pride blinds them to subtle manipulation. They feel confident, in control, and, most critically, unthreatened. And in that state, people become far easier to lead, deceive, or distract. This is especially true when your true intentions are controversial, aggressive, or hidden. Rather than argue or explain, you distract the target with something they already love: themselves. Here's how it works. You start by identifying what your target values about themselves. Is it their intelligence, their experience, their reputation, their creativity? Once you isolate that trait, you mirror it back with subtle, believable compliments. Not over-the-top praise, just enough to reinforce what they already want to believe. Flattery works best when it seems incidental. A quiet compliment during a serious conversation. A remark made in front of others. A nod to their legacy or unique talents. It's not just about words. It's about recognition. You're feeding their narrative of who they are. Now, while they're basking in that feeling, you make your real move, whether it's slipping in an idea, steering them away from suspicion, or pushing forward a plan they'd normally resist. Their ego becomes the smokescreen behind which you maneuver. This tactic doesn't just work on individuals, it works in group settings too. Entire audiences can be manipulated with strategic flattery. You're not like the others. Only someone with your experience would understand. When you make people feel uniquely capable, they're more likely to align with you, even against their better judgment. Machiavelli's brilliance lies in how he used this not for shallow manipulation, but for control over political dynamics. He advised leaders to surround themselves with people who needed flattery, because such people are easier to control. At the same time, he warned princes to beware of their own egos. A person who flatters you is studying you, preparing to distract you from their real motives. So how do you use this responsibly? First, always know your audience. Don't flatter a skeptic the same way you would a narcissist. Second, anchor your flattery in truth, or at least in believable exaggeration. Too much, and it reads as manipulation. Too little, and it has no effect. Finally, remember this. Flattery is not praise. It's a transaction. You're giving them validation, and in return, you get access, trust, and time. Use that time wisely, because while they're smiling at the sound of their own greatness, you're rewriting the outcome of the game behind the curtain. Divide and conquer. Never let others unite against you. Machiavelli was deeply aware of a truth that still applies across empires, companies, and households. Unity is dangerous, not for those who are united, but for those in power trying to control them. That's why one of his most enduring strategies is the principle of divide and conquer. Never let your enemies, or even your allies, form alliances so strong that they could challenge your authority. Fragmented opposition is manageable. Unified opposition is lethal. In political warfare, this is Strategy 101. A ruler facing rebellion from multiple factions can easily be overthrown if those factions join forces. But if each group suspects the others, or if they believe they stand to gain more by acting alone, they become divided and distracted. Their mutual distrust becomes your shield. Machiavelli observed this firsthand in Renaissance Italy, where cities like Florence, Milan, and Venice were in constant rivalry. A strong prince wouldn't try to appease all parties. Instead, he'd play them against each other, whispering into the ear of one that the other was plotting betrayal, offering small concessions to one side to spark jealousy in another, or subtly spreading fear that a rival faction was gaining favor. By keeping them busy with internal disputes, the prince remained the sole figure of stability, and thus power. This tactic isn't just for the battlefield or court politics. In corporate leadership, smart executives may prevent their senior managers from forming a united front by keeping them focused on internal competition, budget disputes, differing visions, or exclusive access to information. While this sounds ruthless, it serves a purpose. As long as internal power centers remain fragmented, they can't collectively challenge the top. And in more personal dynamics, even families or social groups, divide and conquer can subtly influence outcomes. Favoring one sibling over another, sharing partial truths, rewarding individual loyalty rather than group efforts. All of these quietly erode unity. But here's the deeper Machiavellian insight. You don't need to manufacture chaos. You only need to amplify what's already there. Most groups already carry resentment, rivalry, ambition. Your role is to guide it without being seen as the guide. Drop a subtle comment. Encourage a competitive mindset. Create structures where collaboration feels risky, or where rewards are individual, not shared. One of the most effective tools in this strategy is scarcity. Make resources limited. Make access to you limited. Make people believe that someone else is getting more than they are. Jealousy is one of the easiest ways to sow division, and once it takes root, people often sabotage each other without you lifting a finger. Of course, this must be balanced. Divide and conquer doesn't mean chaos. Too much fragmentation can destabilize your own structure. Your goal is not to burn the house down. It's to ensure that no one else can build a tower taller than yours. Maintain enough order to function, but enough friction to remain the center of gravity. At its heart, divide and conquer is psychological warfare that targets cohesion. Because when people trust one another more than they fear you, your power is at risk. But when they mistrust one another, when they see their peers as threats, they turn to you, not out of loyalty, but necessity. And that's often a far more enduring kind of control. Use symbols and rituals to build loyalty. Machiavelli understood that raw power is never enough. Fear can compel obedience, but it cannot sustain loyalty. To truly secure a lasting grip on people's hearts and minds, you must speak to something deeper: their identity, their need for meaning, and their desire to belong to something greater than themselves. This is where symbols and rituals become powerful tools of psychological warfare. Symbols are not just logos or flags, they are emotional anchors. Rituals are not just routines, they are behavior reinforced with meaning. Both are mechanisms that bind individuals to a collective, and more importantly, to the one who created or controls those symbols. In The Prince, Machiavelli hints at this when he praises rulers who appear religious, even if they are not. Why? Because religion, with its rituals, icons, and sacred narratives, is a masterclass in long-term influence. When people participate in ritual, when they salute a flag, recite a creed, or follow a protocol, they internalize a sense of unity, purpose, and submission. The act becomes identity. Now translate this into leadership or power dynamics. If you want to build loyalty, not just compliance, you need to create symbols people can emotionally attach to. A company doesn't just need a brand, it needs a mission, a slogan, a culture. A leader doesn't just give commands, they embody values, wear a uniform, use distinct language. These elements create emotional resonance. Machiavellian strategy demands you be aware of this and use it with intent. Think of how military organizations rely on ceremonies, ranks, medals, not only to recognize behavior, but to create a sense of order and purpose. Or how cults and movements thrive not just on ideas, but on colors, chants, dress codes, sacred spaces. These rituals reinforce hierarchy and blur the line between free will and conditioning. But here's the subtle art. Make the symbol feel sacred, but the source unknown. The power lies in the ritual, not the logic behind it. Once a ritual is embedded, people stop questioning its origin. They just follow, often with passion. That's how power transitions from visible to internalized. You're no longer forcing loyalty. They're choosing it because they believe in the symbol. To build this effectively, start small. Create consistent patterns. Give roles names. Give gatherings structure. Mark achievements with symbolic gestures, not just bonuses or praise, but visible tokens, pins, awards, titles. Over time, these become identity markers. And once identity is involved, people will defend their role in the system, even against their own interests. Rituals are even more powerful when tied to exclusivity. Give only certain people access to a symbol. Make others earn it. Once they do, they'll guard it with intensity. It becomes not just a symbol of you, the leader, but of who they are. That's the goal. When your people fight to protect the structure you created, you no longer need to enforce control. They do it for you. In the end, Machiavelli would tell you, power is visible. But influence, true lasting influence, hides in rituals and symbols. That's where loyalty becomes unbreakable. Be a lion and a fox, powerful and cunning. Machiavelli famously wrote that a successful leader must learn to be both a lion and a fox. This was not poetic metaphor, it was practical instruction. The lion represents brute force, dominance, and fearlessness. The fox symbolizes cunning, adaptability, and deception. Most people, and most leaders, choose one over the other. Machiavelli's brilliance was in recognizing that real power comes from being both at the same time, switching fluidly between the two depending on the battlefield. Why the lion? Because fear is a powerful tool. People don't always respect kindness, but they remember consequences. The lion doesn't need to speak much. Its presence alone inspires caution. The lion represents your ability to command authority, to act decisively, and when necessary, to deliver punishment swiftly. In a world full of soft voices and ambiguous leadership, sometimes the loud roar is needed to silence opposition and establish hierarchy. But the lion alone is not enough. A lion can be seen, tracked, predicted. It's a creature of instinct and strength, but not strategy. That's where the fox comes in. The fox is stealthy. It avoids traps and sets them. It understands that not every battle is won through confrontation. Many are won through confusion, manipulation, or redirection. The fox thrives in subtlety, deception, and control over perception. It wins by knowing when to retreat, when to observe, and when to strike, quietly. When Machiavelli advised rulers to be both, he wasn't saying to play both roles at once, but to master both mindsets and know when to switch. There are moments when a direct show of strength crushes resistance, but there are also times when strength makes you a target. There are moments when lying low and planting false signals disarms your enemies, and others when silence is mistaken for weakness. The key is in reading the moment and adapting instantly. In practice, this could mean combining fear and charm in your leadership style. You might inspire loyalty by being just, while making it clear that betrayal will be punished without mercy. You might smile in negotiations while planting subtle traps for your opponent to walk into. You might deliver bad news with confidence, but create the illusion that the decision was unavoidable, even necessary. The lion ensures that people think twice before challenging you. The fox ensures they never see the challenge coming. Think about the leaders history remembers. The most successful ones weren't just strong or just smart. They were both. They wielded fear without losing control. They deceived without being distrusted. They crushed enemies when needed, but avoided fights they couldn't win. They walked like lions in the daylight and crept like foxes in the dark. To be feared but not hated, respected but not exposed. That's the Machiavellian ideal. And it can only be achieved by mastering both the roar and the whisper, the claws and the mind, the lion and the fox. Control your image. Never let others define you. In Machiavelli's world, image was not just a reflection of power. It was power. He understood something we're only beginning to grasp today in our media-saturated culture. Perception is reality. And if you don't actively shape your image, others will do it for you, and rarely in your favor. Machiavelli advised rulers to appear virtuous even if they were not, to display generosity while hiding greed, to look just while making ruthless decisions. Why? Because people are far more responsive to what they believe you are than what you actually are. It doesn't matter if you're kind behind the scenes if you're seen as weak. It doesn't matter if you're strategic in private, if you're perceived as erratic. Your image is the mask the world sees. And in power games, the mask matters more than the face behind it. To control your image means you decide the story people tell about you. You guide the narrative, not by denying who you are, but by editing what parts are visible. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for lies without purpose. He was advocating for strategic concealment and presentation. Let's break this down. Controlling your image involves three key components. Visibility. You must be seen, but only in the right way. Never be too accessible. Machiavelli wrote that rulers should be both loved and feared, but feared in a way that doesn't breed hatred. Being constantly present makes you too familiar, and familiarity, over time, breeds disrespect. Make your appearances matter. Show up at high points, disappear at low ones. Leave people wondering and talking. Symbolism. People respond to images, titles, symbols. Whether it's how you dress, how you speak, or who you associate with, these signals shape perception. Are you seen with authority figures? Do you project calm during chaos? Are your words repeated and your opinions respected? Every detail matters, because the story writes itself in people's minds based on how you present yourself. Narrative management. When others attempt to define you, through gossip, slander, or opposition, you must counter immediately, not by defending yourself emotionally, but by reframing. Machiavelli would suggest giving people a reason to doubt the critic rather than trying to explain yourself. Control the frame of reference. Make your enemies look jealous, petty, or confused. Never get defensive. Instead, get strategic. In the modern world, this strategy plays out constantly. Public figures curate social media like kings used to curate portraits. CEOs give carefully crafted interviews. Leaders control the lighting, the language, even the background music. Why? Because they understand what Machiavelli did centuries ago. The man who shapes the mirror shapes the kingdom. Letting others define you is the fastest way to lose power. They will paint you weak, cruel, untrustworthy, not because it's true, but because it's useful to them. Your job is to never let their brush touch the canvas. You paint the portrait. You own the frame. And in doing so, you become not just a leader, but a legend. Act boldly, even when unsure. Confidence confuses. Machiavelli understood that in both politics and war, people don't follow the person with all the answers. They follow the person who seems like they do. Boldness is not about being right. It's about being convincing. In a world full of hesitation, the bold actor appears like a leader, even when they're only guessing. Fortune favors the bold, Machiavelli wrote, echoing a theme that would define many of history's most decisive figures. The key is this: when you act with confidence, especially in moments of uncertainty, you seize psychological control of the situation. Why? Because most people are looking for direction. They're scanning the room for someone who seems certain so they don't have to be. This is why boldness, even if built on shaky ground, can confuse rivals and inspire followers. In battle, hesitation is often deadlier than a mistake. The same goes for leadership, negotiation, and persuasion. Bold moves force your opponents to recalibrate. They begin to question their judgment. If he's moving so confidently, they wonder, maybe I've missed something. And just like that, the psychological tide shifts. Now, this doesn't mean you act rashly. There's a difference between recklessness and boldness. Recklessness is driven by impulse. Boldness is strategic. It knows the odds, understands the weaknesses, but chooses not to flinch. It's theater, designed to take control of the emotional tempo in a situation. Consider a moment in history. Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon. It was a bold move, technically treasonous, but it overwhelmed the Roman elite with the sheer audacity of it. That single act forced the Senate into a reactive posture. They had no choice but to respond to Caesar on his terms. Machiavelli admired this kind of aggression. He believed that fortune, or opportunity, was like a woman. She favored the bold, the impetuous, those willing to seize her by force rather than wait patiently. Hesitation, to him, was death by 1,000 internal doubts. Even in daily life, this tactic works. Imagine two people applying for the same leadership role. One says, "I believe I might be ready, but I'd love to grow into it." The other says, "I'm ready now. Here's what I'll change in the first month." Who gets noticed? Who commands attention? The second. Not necessarily because they're better, but because they sound like a leader. That is psychological warfare in its cleanest form. Confidence distorts perception. It makes people mistake poise for competence and certainty for truth. When used intentionally, boldness becomes a weapon. It blinds others to your uncertainty, distracts from your weaknesses, and puts everyone else on their heels. So even when you doubt yourself, especially then, act as though you don't. Speak out decisively. Move quickly. Don't ask for space. Take it. You'll find that people don't always follow the smartest person in the room. They follow the one who seems like they already own it. Punish publicly. Reward privately. Machiavelli was obsessed with optics. To him, power was not just about actions. It was about how those actions were seen. One of his most enduring strategies is deceptively simple but immensely powerful. Punish publicly. Reward privately. Why publicly punish? Because punishment, when delivered visibly, decisively, and without hesitation, sends a signal, not just to the individual being punished, but to everyone watching. It reinforces hierarchy. It establishes the boundaries of acceptable behavior. It creates a climate of caution. Fear, Machiavelli believed, is a more stable emotion than love. Love fades, fear endures, and few things instill fear like watching someone else suffer the consequences in full view. Whether it's a soldier executed for desertion, a courtier exiled for disloyalty, or a modern employee fired for breaking policy, the public nature of the punishment communicates far more than the punishment itself. It says, "This could be you." That single idea, implanted in the minds of others, is enough to deter rebellion, betrayal, and laziness. People fall in line not because they are good, but because they are afraid of what will happen if they're not. But here's the twist. Reward should be private. Why? Because public rewards breed resentment. When people see someone else being praised, promoted, or gifted, they don't always feel inspired. They feel jealous. They start comparing. Why him, not me? What did she do that I didn't? Public rewards fracture unity, even when well-intended. Private rewards, however, do the opposite. When you praise or reward someone in private, it feels personal, intimate. It deepens loyalty. The recipient doesn't feel used as a prop. They feel seen. And because no one else knows, there's no backlash, no murmurs of favoritism, no destabilizing envy. Machiavelli's brilliance lies in how this tactic maintains both fear and loyalty at the same time. Public punishment creates the fear that keeps people in check. Private reward creates the loyalty that makes people want to serve you. And both actions serve as mirrors. One reflects power, the other reflects favor. Both are psychological instruments, carefully tuned. In modern environments, this still works flawlessly. A team leader might call out a failure during a team meeting to emphasize standards, but offer thanks or bonuses behind closed doors. A political leader might denounce a disloyal minister in public while quietly granting privileges to the most loyal advisors. The stage matters. The audience matters more. The worst mistake a leader can make, Machiavelli would argue, is to reverse this strategy, to reward loudly and punish quietly. That creates entitlement, jealousy, and no fear. It dissolves your authority. It trains people to expect public praise. And when they don't receive it, they rebel. Quiet punishments go unnoticed, and thus carry no deterrent effect. Power is not just what you do, it's how and when you do it. In this case, timing and visibility are everything. Punish publicly to create boundaries. Reward privately to build loyalty. Because people forget rewards, but they never forget a public reckoning. Befriend those more ambitious than loyal. They're easier to predict. One of Machiavelli's more subtle and easily overlooked principles of psychological warfare is this. It is safer to surround yourself with ambitious people than with those who profess loyalty without question. Why? because ambition is predictable. Loyalty, especially when unexamined, is not. This may seem counterintuitive. After all, shouldn't loyalty be the bedrock of trust? Not necessarily. Machiavelli knew that blind loyalty is unstable, especially when tested by power, greed, or fear. People who claim absolute loyalty often have undefined motives. They may serve you sincerely, or they may be hiding self-interest behind devotion. And when the tides shift, they often do not hesitate to jump ship, especially if their loyalty was a performance all along. Ambitious individuals, on the other hand, wear their motivations on their sleeves. They want more: power, recognition, status. That makes them easier to read. And if you're the one who can offer them a path to that ambition, or at least appear to, you gain their cooperation on terms you control. The beauty of this lies in clarity. A man driven by ambition will behave logically. He will take risks for gain. He will align with strength, and he will avoid unnecessary threats. When such a person is in your circle, you can predict his behavior, because it's governed by cause and effect. Ambition is rational. Loyalty, when genuine, is emotional. And emotions shift. History proves this again and again. Take the example of Napoleon Bonaparte. Many of the generals and administrators he elevated were not longtime loyalists, but men of extraordinary ambition. He understood that they would work tirelessly, outmaneuver enemies, and seek glory, because their success was tied to his success. When their ambitions aligned with his empire, they became powerful engines of expansion. Loyalty didn't drive them. Self-interest did. That made them reliable in a Machiavellian sense. Contrast that with leaders who relied on sycophants or flatterers. Those loyal subordinates often became threats, either by manipulating access, creating dependency, or turning coat when adversity struck. When you surround yourself with the ambitious, you also keep competition visible. You can see where others are aiming, how they're moving. You know who wants your position, your influence, your throne. And that gives you a tactical edge. It's the enemies in the shadows, those who pretend to want nothing, that are truly dangerous. Machiavelli would urge you not to seek false comfort in declarations of loyalty. Instead, recognize ambition as a kind of truth. It tells you what a person values. Use that. Reward it just enough to keep their eyes on what you want them to pursue. And never forget, if they get too strong or their ambition becomes a threat, you'll have seen it coming all along. Reveal truth in small, controlled doses. In Machiavelli's world, and in ours, truth is not something you simply hand over. It is something you manage, time, and release with precision. Information is power, and in the wrong hands or at the wrong moment, it becomes a weapon against you. That's why one of the most effective forms of psychological warfare is to reveal truth in small, controlled doses. Why does this work? Because the full truth all at once is often too much, too destabilizing. It causes panic, resistance, or disbelief. But when truth is revealed gradually, the audience becomes accustomed to each new layer. People absorb what they can handle, they adjust, and most importantly, they begin to rely on you as the source of that truth. Think of political leaders during wartime. Rarely do they expose the full scale of a disaster or conflict immediately. Instead, they reveal select facts. A number here, a setback there, carefully shaped, always with a framing that keeps the public calm, supportive, and dependent on leadership for answers. Even in corporations, during scandals or economic downturns, the truth is leaked, not dumped. Why? Because shock breeds chaos, but controlled disclosure maintains influence. Machiavelli understood that control of truth is control of perception, and perception drives decisions, alliances, even rebellions. When you reveal the truth in doses, you achieve several things at once. You stay in control of the narrative. By managing timing and content, you dictate how others interpret reality. You don't lie. You simply decide how much they know and when. You test reactions. Each piece of truth serves as a probe. How do people respond? Do they panic? Do they demand more? Or do they accept it passively? Their reaction informs your next move. You increase dependence. When people know they don't have the full story, they look to you for more. They don't go to others. They don't challenge you because they're still waiting for you to deliver the next piece. That is control. You build resilience. A gradual reveal trains people to endure difficult truths. It builds tolerance. That makes it easier for you to lead through uncertainty or crisis. Consider the art of interrogation. A skilled interrogator never dumps all they know. Instead, they lead the subject down a path, revealing bits of knowledge that compel cooperation. Each revelation is strategic. Each one builds pressure. And by the time the full truth is laid bare, the subject is already halfway to surrender. You can use this in negotiations, leadership, even personal relationships. When trust is fragile, when stakes are high, give just enough truth to earn credibility, but not so much that you lose leverage. Make others want more. Keep them curious, off balance, but reliant on you. Truth is not a gift. It is a tool. And in Machiavellian hands, it becomes one of the sharpest weapons in the arsenal, not by its volume, but by its timing and precision. Let others believe your victories are theirs. One of the most subtle forms of power is the ability to win, and let someone else take the credit. On the surface, this may seem counterintuitive. After all, in a world driven by recognition and status, why would anyone want to give away their triumph? But Machiavelli understood that ego is a resource, and when used strategically, it can be the leash with which you guide those who think they're leading. This strategy plays into a deep psychological truth. People are far more committed to ideas and plans they believe they've created. If you want someone to support your direction, don't argue for it directly. Instead, guide the conversation, seed the thoughts, and allow them to discover your idea as their own. When the time comes to act, they'll fight for it, not because they were convinced, but because they believe it originated from them. Machiavelli observed that powerful leaders often let advisors or generals bask in temporary glory. Why? Because the illusion of victory pacifies ambition. When people believe they're winning, they don't challenge the system. But the wise leader stays behind the curtain, pulling the strings, setting the board. The real reward is not praise. It's control without resistance. In politics, this manifests through coalition building. You present a policy or direction in such a way that other stakeholders believe it serves their interests first. In organizations, it means allowing managers to announce wins you orchestrated. In personal relationships, it means planting ideas subtly, then letting others run with them, convinced it was their initiative. What's critical here is authentic framing. Don't just dump your idea in someone's lap and say, "Make it yours." Instead, shape the environment where the idea seems to arise organically. Ask leading questions. Suggest partial solutions. Express admiration when they arrive at the right conclusion. Let them take the wheel, but you design the road. The benefits compound. You reduce resistance to your strategy. You strengthen others' confidence in themselves, and by extension, in you. You shield yourself from blame if the outcome falters. You gain allies who believe they're in control, while actually working your plan. This doesn't mean you disappear entirely. You still need to hold quiet command of the direction, adjusting course subtly. But by giving others a sense of ownership, you gain loyalty that force or authority could never earn. Ultimately, the ego wants to feel important. Feed that desire strategically, and people will walk right into your design, believing it's their own castle they're building. Meanwhile, you're the architect, unseen but essential. Exploit chaos. Never waste a crisis. Where others see danger, the Machiavellian mind sees opportunity. Chaos is the great equalizer. It erodes structure, disrupts order, and throws everyone off balance. And when people are off balance, they become more susceptible to influence. Machiavelli recognized that while peace breeds complacency, crisis creates change. And those who are prepared can reshape the world, while others are still scrambling to survive. In The Prince, he highlights that times of upheaval often allow bold leaders to rise. Historical shifts, revolutions, power vacuums. These aren't just historical moments. They're moments of leverage. In crisis, people crave stability. If you can offer it, or appear to, they'll follow you, sometimes blindly. But it requires readiness. You must have the plan, the nerve, and the clarity to act when everyone else hesitates. Psychologically, crisis weakens critical thinking. Under stress, the brain defaults to emotion and urgency. That's when Machiavellian strategy thrives. Introduce a clear direction, a scapegoat, a solution that favors your position, and you can guide the entire emotional current of a room, an organization, even a country. Modern examples abound. Business leaders use downturns to restructure companies, eliminate threats, and implement previously unpopular changes. Politicians use security threats to expand powers. Influencers rise during moral panic, offering certainty to the confused. The chaos is not an obstacle, it's a stage. But this strategy requires subtlety. If you exploit crisis too obviously, you risk backlash. People may resent you once the dust settles. That's why Machiavelli emphasized discretion. Act as the stabilizer, the calm in the storm, not the opportunist. Let others believe you're saving the day, even if you're the one who let the storm escalate. Also, chaos doesn't always need to be external. You can create controlled disorder, within reason, to throw off a rival, break up an alliance, or provoke urgency. Start small. A strategic leak, a withdrawn offer, a pointed silence. Let things spin, then step in with the answer. When using this tactic, ask, who benefits most from this crisis? What power structure is vulnerable right now? What change can I introduce now that would have been resisted before? And always remember, never let a good crisis go to waste. In the ashes of disorder lies the perfect material for reshaping the world in your favor. If you're bold enough to move while others freeze. Keep your friends few and your rivals closer. Trust is expensive, loyalty even more so. And in Machiavellian strategy, it's not your friends you need to monitor. It's your rivals. That's why the timeless principle is not just to keep enemies close, but to keep them closer than friends. Not out of goodwill, but for control, information, and anticipation. Friends bring comfort, but comfort breeds weakness. Rivals, on the other hand, sharpen your instincts. They remind you what's at stake, what's possible, and how quickly alliances can shift. By keeping them close, you disarm them, not by changing who they are, but by watching them so closely that they can't act without you knowing. Machiavelli knew that enemies left outside your circle can gather power, organize resistance, or strike from the shadows. But enemies brought near, into councils, into meetings, into favor, lose freedom. Their words are filtered, their actions scrutinized. They become contained within your sphere of influence. There's also a psychological advantage. When a rival believes they've been accepted, they often lower their guard. They begin to believe you've forgiven, forgotten, or even respect them. This illusion makes them predictable, and predictable opponents are easy to control. This strategy also keeps you in control of the narrative. If someone is going to oppose you, wouldn't you rather it be in your space, under your watch, with your eyes on every move? That's the essence of this tactic, surveillance masked as civility. In corporate settings, this looks like inviting a competing executive into a project, knowing you'll watch how they think and where they try to steer. In politics, it's forming strategic coalitions with ideological opposites. In social dynamics, it's keeping the gossip close, not to befriend, but to redirect. But Machiavelli also warned, do not let rivals into your confidence. Keep them near, but not in. Share surface-level trust, not inner truths. Feed them curated wins. Let them think they're gaining favor, while you're simply measuring their intent. Friends, by contrast, are fewer and must be chosen with extraordinary care. Too many friends create factions, jealousy, or false alliances. A few loyal allies, tested by time and crisis, are more valuable than 100 handshakes. Ask yourself, which rival do you understand best, and why? Who feels they've been included in your plans? What are you learning from them that they don't realize you see? The best leaders don't eliminate all their enemies. They illuminate them. By keeping them so close, their every move becomes part of the leader's own strategy. Make others feel they're part of your success. Machiavelli knew that power is rarely seized alone. Even the strongest leaders need followers, allies, and supporters, people willing to work, defend, and even fight for a cause they believe they're a part of. That's why one of the most psychologically effective strategies is to make others feel invested in your victories. Not just in name, but emotionally, personally. It's a subtle manipulation of pride and belonging. When people believe they played a role in your success, even a small one, they become protectors of it. They defend you not because they were ordered to, but because they want to. They internalize your victories as their own. This emotional bond can make criticism of you feel like criticism of them. That's power. The strategy works in two parts. First, you create the perception of shared ownership. You give credit even if it wasn't earned. You say things like, "We couldn't have done this without you," or "This team made this possible." These gestures may seem harmless or even generous, but they're strategic. You're not giving away power. You're reinforcing loyalty. Second, you give symbolic roles. People don't need full control. They need the illusion of contribution. Let someone introduce the idea, even if you've already decided. Let another take the credit for delivering the result while you orchestrate the entire process. The more people feel seen and acknowledged, the more loyal they become. It's emotional ownership. Machiavelli would argue that this is also a shield against envy. Power breeds resentment, especially if it appears selfish or exclusive. But when you spread the emotional wealth, you disarm potential jealousy. People don't want to destroy what they helped build. This strategy is deeply manipulative, but it doesn't need to be cruel. It's about understanding human psychology. People want to matter. They want to be remembered. If you can satisfy that need, even artificially, you gain something priceless. Committed allies who will defend your reputation, fight your enemies, and help carry your ambition further than you could alone. The danger? If you make people feel included, you must manage expectations. Don't promise true power unless you're willing to share it. Let them feel important, but never too important. Keep the hierarchy clear, even if it's behind the curtain, and always be ready to shift the spotlight as needed. When used well, this strategy becomes a glue that holds empires together. People fight hardest for a cause they believe they built, so let them believe it. Their loyalty may outlast even your influence. Don't just defeat rivals, destroy their legacy. In The Prince, Machiavelli doesn't sugarcoat the nature of power. When it comes to rivals, especially those with loyal followings, respected reputations, or influence rooted in the past, defeat is not enough. He insists on a chilling principle. You must destroy their legacy. Why? Because legacies outlive bodies. You can exile a rival, discredit them, even kill them. But if their name still inspires loyalty, they continue to exist in the minds of your enemies. That's a threat to your authority. Ideas, myths, and memories can be more dangerous than armies. Machiavelli uses the example of conquered rulers. It wasn't enough to seize their lands. Their bloodlines had to be ended, their symbols erased, their memory tarnished. Why? Because a fallen ruler's son can become a rallying point for resistance. A beloved general's name can stir the hearts of future opposition. That's legacy, and it must be extinguished. In modern terms, this strategy shows up in public life, politics, and corporate warfare. When a powerful figure is removed, the smart tactician doesn't stop at removal. They revise the narrative. They control the aftermath. They plant seeds of doubt about the rival's intentions, character, and competence. They rewrite history before others can preserve it. One method is to redefine what the rival stood for. Was your opponent known as a reformer? Call them reckless. A visionary? Call them unrealistic. Their followers may resist at first, but over time, repetition, isolation, and propaganda work like erosion. The memory softens. The threat dissolves. Another method is appropriation. You don't always need to burn your enemy's legacy. Sometimes you steal it. Take credit for their ideas. Position yourself as the true heir to what they built. It's not about denying the rival. It's about absorbing their myth into your own image, draining their memory of independent power. But this strategy must be used wisely. If you attack too publicly, you can appear insecure. Too harsh, and you risk martyring your enemy. The art is in the slow dismantling. Undermine them socially, politically, morally, until their name no longer carries weight, until their story is no longer told. Machiavelli's lesson here is stark. True victory is not when the enemy falls, but when no one dares to remember them with pride. In your own struggles, big or small, understand this. Leaving an enemy's name intact can mean leaving a door open. And in a game of power, unfinished enemies have a way of returning. Control emotions, yours and theirs. Few strategies are more central to Machiavellian thinking than emotional discipline. To control others, you must first control yourself, and then, once your own emotions are in check, you can use theirs against them. Because in the war for power and influence, emotion is both a weapon and a weakness, depending on who holds it. Machiavelli was clear. The moment you let anger, fear, or pride dictate your behavior, you surrender control. You become reactive instead of strategic. And that's dangerous. Because those who control their emotions can fake them. They can stage anger, project calm, perform empathy, all while remaining focused on their true objective. Start with your own emotions. You must learn to recognize them without obeying them. Anger is useful if it's a tool, destructive if it's a reflex. Fear can keep you cautious, but unchecked, it will paralyze. Even hope, if too strong, can blind you to risk. Machiavelli believed that cold clarity beats passion every time, especially in leadership. He also knew that when people observe your emotional control, they trust you more, or fear you more, depending on what you show. A calm leader in crisis creates confidence. A silent opponent unnerves rivals. When others expect you to lash out and you don't, they lose their bearings. That's psychological dominance. Now flip the script. Once you've mastered your own emotions, you begin shaping theirs. Emotional influence is the foundation of manipulation. Make them angry, and they'll speak carelessly. Make them fearful, and they'll accept your protection. Make them feel chosen, and they'll obey without question. You become the author of their responses. One effective tactic is the use of emotional contrast. If you alternate warmth with coldness, praise with distance, inclusion with silence, you create a kind of dependency. People become addicted to winning your approval. They internalize your emotional rhythm, and they begin to shape their behavior around it. Another tactic is calm confrontation. Instead of arguing, simply observe. Let your silence provoke their guilt or defensiveness. Often people will reveal more when you say less. Their emotions fill the silence, and when they lose emotional control, you gain negotiation leverage. But Machiavelli would warn, this is not about becoming robotic. It's about becoming calculated. You can show emotion. Just make sure it's chosen, not triggered. Rage can be effective if it's performative. Grief can win sympathy if it's timed. Charm can seduce, but it must be sustainable. At its core, this strategy that is about awareness. Most people are ruled by what they feel. The Machiavellian practitioner uses that fact to steer conversations, decisions, and destinies. Control yourself. Shape them. And you will no longer be reacting to the world. You'll be designing it. Use scarcity to increase your value. Scarcity is one of the most potent psychological levers known to human behavior. Machiavelli understood that people do not merely value what is good, they value what is rare. It is not always about merit, skill, or power. Sometimes the simple perception of limited availability makes someone or something seem more desirable, more respected, and more powerful than it actually is. This principle of using scarcity to increase your value is not just about resources. It's about your presence, your time, your attention, and your favor. When you are always available, always present, and always giving, you become common. And what is common is taken for granted. But when you withhold just enough, when you show that your energy, words, or involvement must be earned, people start to chase what you once gave freely. Machiavelli might say that a prince who is always seen, always approachable, begins to lose his mystique. Instead, he should show himself only on certain occasions, appearing as both necessary and exclusive. Think of royalty or high-status leaders. They are rarely seen casually. Their time is tightly managed. Their access is controlled. This doesn't diminish their influence. It amplifies it. Because when they do appear, people notice. Their scarcity makes their presence feel like a privilege. This tactic can be used in nearly every domain of life. In business, exclusive offers, limited-time deals, or VIP access play directly into the scarcity principle. People act faster, pay more, and value the product or person more deeply when they believe it is not easily available. Psychologically, scarcity creates urgency, and urgency drives action. In relationships, social or romantic, the one who gives everything too soon is rarely the one most respected. But the person who holds some back, who creates a sense of mystery or emotional challenge, often ends up in control. Not by force, but through perceived value. They are the prize because their attention isn't given freely. It's earned. But scarcity must be authentic and controlled. Artificial scarcity that feels like manipulation can backfire. You can't simply disappear or act cold. That creates resentment. Instead, it's about intentional restraint. Give a little, then pull back. Be generous once, then unavailable. Speak when you have something meaningful to say, not just to fill space. Respond to messages slowly. Decline some invitations. Let people want your presence, your insights, your approval. Scarcity also reinforces boundaries, which are essential to power. People who lack boundaries give too much and end up exhausted and invisible. People who use scarcity wisely, with precision and purpose, create the impression that their time is already valuable, their resources already demanded, and their favor something not to be wasted. In a world drowning in noise, the rare voice is the one that's remembered. Be that voice. Be that presence. Let your scarcity be your silent weapon. And watch as people come to you, not because you asked, but because you made them believe they couldn't afford not to. Create the illusion of choice. One of the most subtle yet effective strategies in psychological warfare is to create the illusion of choice. Machiavelli understood that while people may follow orders, they prefer to feel in control. They want to believe their decisions are their own, even if every path was quietly designed to benefit someone else, you. To create the illusion of choice is to master manipulation at its most elegant. It's not about forcing people. It's about guiding them through a maze you built, one where every exit leads to your desired outcome. Here's how it works. Let's say you want someone to agree to a policy, a rule, or an alliance. Instead of commanding them directly, you offer them multiple options. Each option appears distinct and independent, but all are crafted to serve your goal. One might be harsh, one might be softer, one might seem like a compromise. But no matter what they choose, you win because you designed the options, not just the outcome. This strategy is used by rulers, negotiators, parents, and marketers alike. When Machiavelli served in Florence's government, he often advised leaders to frame policies in a way that made citizens feel involved. Give them a say, but only in the shape of the structure, not the structure itself. The illusion of input diffuses rebellion. People are less likely to fight a decision they believe they participated in, even if the participation was symbolic. In politics, this often appears in referendums, town hall consultations, or stage debates where all roads lead to the same legislation. In business, this shows up in marketing, offering you 3 price plans, a cheap one with too little, an expensive one with too much, and the middle option that's exactly what the company wants you to pick. You feel like you've chosen freely. In truth, you were guided. The psychological power behind this is rooted in ego and autonomy. People want control. They resist authority that's imposed. But when they think they've chosen their path, even when tricked into it, they defend it as if it were their idea. You can apply this in everyday interactions. When negotiating with a colleague or managing a team, never say, "Here's what we're doing." Instead say, "We have 2 options. Both benefit you, but the act of choosing makes them feel respected." This builds compliance without conflict. The key is subtlety. The illusion breaks if it feels staged. Your options must seem legitimate. Your tone must remain neutral, and the process must feel open. But inside, you've already picked the ending. You just let others walk there on their own. Machiavelli didn't just want power. He wanted power that maintained itself, power that didn't need to be enforced every hour. Giving people the illusion of choice is how you get obedience without resistance, loyalty without fear, and peace without surrender. Be seen with power, not in need of it. In Machiavellian strategy, perception often outweighs truth. It's not enough to have power. You must be seen with it. Because in the minds of others, the appearance of power is power. And just as crucial, you must never be seen needing power. The moment you look desperate to gain approval, position, or influence, you signal weakness. And weakness attracts opportunists. So what does it mean to be seen with power? It means controlling how others perceive your status, your influence, and your authority, without ever begging for it. Power isn't loud. It's not about dominance through shouting or grandstanding. It's about calm confidence. It's about carrying yourself as though you don't need permission, because people who have real power don't ask for it. Machiavelli saw this play out constantly among leaders. A prince who scrambles for validation, who changes direction with every popular opinion, or who chases influence from others is not seen as a ruler. He's seen as a follower. But a leader who makes firm decisions, who withholds reaction, who doesn't flinch in crisis, that person commands respect, even if they don't hold the strongest army or title. To embody power, start with your presence. Control your body language. Eye contact should be steady, posture strong, movement slow and deliberate. Speak only when needed, but when you do, speak with clarity and finality. Let silence follow your words. It makes people listen harder. Next is scarcity. As previously discussed, don't be available to everyone all the time. Powerful people set the schedule. They control access. When you respond immediately to every request, when you say yes to every invitation, you appear eager. And eagerness is the currency of the powerless. Also, understand association. Who you're seen with shapes how you're seen. If you spend your time with those who are weak, petty, or desperate, some of that rubs off on you. But when you're aligned with strong, strategic, respected people, your own perceived power rises, even if your actual position hasn't changed. But perhaps most important, never chase recognition. Praise that you ask for loses value. Authority that you beg for is authority you don't truly have. Let others speak of your strength. Don't speak it yourself. Let your actions, your restraint, and your results be your voice. Machiavelli believed that those who seek to appear powerful too desperately often unravel. But those who quietly live as if they already possess influence tend to gather real followers. Why? Because people are drawn to certainty. They don't want to be led by someone still trying to prove their worth. They want to follow someone who radiates value without asking for validation. Be seen with power, not because you said you have it, but because everyone else acts like you do. Know when to disappear and when to reappear stronger. One of Machiavelli's most understated but powerful principles is this: withdrawal is not weakness. In fact, knowing when to disappear strategically, and more importantly, when to reappear with greater force, is one of the most devastating tactics in psychological warfare. In a culture obsessed with constant presence, attention, and performance, the idea of fading into the background may seem counterintuitive. But for Machiavelli, absence is a tool. It disorients your enemies, recharges your own power, and allows you to re-enter the scene under different conditions, ideally ones you've quietly engineered in your favor. When you disappear, you create tension. People wonder where you've gone. They speculate. They gossip. Are you planning something? Are you defeated? Are you building something bigger in secret? That vacuum of information becomes a breeding ground for fear, admiration, and insecurity, especially among those who considered themselves your rivals. The key is to vanish at the right moment. Disappear not in defeat, but in control. Ideally after a high point, after a win, a speech, a deal, or an act of influence. The idea is to leave while your name is still echoing in the room. Let them remember you at your peak. People forget routine. They remember impact. During this absence, you're not idle. You're studying the terrain. You're evolving. Maybe you're building alliances behind the scenes. Maybe you're reworking your strategy or identifying weak spots in the opposition. This is your strategic incubation period. The world thinks you're gone, but you're just loading the next blow. Then comes the reappearance, and it must be dramatic, not in theatrics, but in timing and precision. You return with results, with knowledge, with leverage. Your comeback must either solve a problem no one else could or disrupt the current power structure. You don't just return, you replace what's no longer working. Consider historical figures like Napoleon, who returned from exile to reclaim command of France, or Steve Jobs, who re-emerged at Apple after being ousted, only to reshape the future of technology. These figures didn't beg their way back. They came back with force and clarity, because they knew exactly when to vanish and what to bring back with them. Machiavelli would say this is more than timing, it's psychological control. You're training others to recognize your absence as unsettling and your return as significant. You become a figure not of routine, but of pivotal moments. You no longer operate within the game. You set the rhythm of the game. So disappear when the moment peaks. Let silence speak. Then reappear, not as who you were, but as someone they didn't see coming. Let others take the fall. Machiavelli believed that responsibility is dangerous, especially in moments of failure. The wise strategist, he argued, should avoid blame while still holding power. That's why one of his most quietly ruthless strategies is this: let others take the fall for your actions, even while you remain untouched and respected. This isn't cowardice, it's survival. Machiavelli understood that leaders live and die by perception. A decision may be necessary but unpopular. A tactic might work long-term but cost lives or resources short-term. In such moments, the masses look for someone to blame. The trick is to guide their eyes away from you. To execute this strategy, you need buffers, people between you and the consequences. These can be advisors, middle managers, commanders, spokespeople, even loyal followers. Their role, whether they know it or not, is to absorb fallout. You place them in charge of executing risky orders or delivering bad news. If it goes well, you thank them publicly. If it fails, you disown the decision. But Machiavelli would warn. This only works if done with finesse. Never overtly throw someone under the bus. That makes you look weak or vindictive. Instead, let the situation implicate them. Let their proximity to the decision, their eagerness, or their own flaws become the story. You must remain above it, calm, disappointed, and ready to restore order. One historical example is Henry VIII, who used his chancellors and advisors to enact his more controversial reforms. When the public or the nobles resisted, those advisors were punished, not the king. He presented himself as reluctantly approving what others advised, keeping his image intact while shaping the world as he saw fit. This tactic works outside politics too. In business, CEOs often allow lower executives to take the blame for failed products or PR disasters. In relationships, people deflect accountability onto timing, context, or the decisions of others. It's always someone else's misstep, and the Machiavellian remains in control of the storyline. But beware. If overused, this can breed distrust. So the key is balance. Take public responsibility when it costs little but gains respect, and deflect it when the cost is too great. Let someone else play the tragic figure, the fallen knight, the misguided soldier. Let them bleed while you hold the crown. In the end, people forget who started the fire. They remember who stood tall when the ashes settled. Be that person. Praise your enemies before their downfall. One of Machiavelli's most elegant strategies, both psychologically manipulative and politically brilliant, is this: praise your enemies before you destroy them. At first glance, this seems contradictory. Why would you elevate someone you intend to defeat? But the logic behind it is razor sharp. Praise doesn't just disarm your enemy, it confuses everyone else watching. Publicly praising your rival makes you appear gracious, secure, and above petty rivalry. It gives the impression that you're confident enough to acknowledge their strengths and not threatened by them. That in itself is a power play. Most people attack their enemies openly, bitterly. When you do the opposite, you leave your adversary and your audience guessing. More importantly, praise is a weapon of emotional manipulation. When used skillfully, it lowers your enemy's guard. It makes them feel respected, even flattered. They become more trusting, less cautious. They may share information, accept proximity, or delay their own defenses. The last thing people expect from a rival is genuine admiration, and that's what makes it effective. You might say, "She's a brilliant negotiator, one of the few people I've learned from." Or, "He's always put his people first, even when we've disagreed." These statements don't just humanize your opponent. They bind them to a narrative you control. And once they're tethered to your words, their downfall can look like tragedy, not treachery. But there's another layer. You gain favor with your audience. By praising your rival before their fall, you appear balanced, reasonable, even benevolent. When the time comes to destroy them, through exposure, outmaneuvering, or outright dismissal, you can say, "I had hoped they would rise to the moment. I respected them. But sadly, they failed." That story lands softer. It makes you look like a reluctant victor, not a ruthless tyrant. This tactic works in politics, business, and even personal rivalries. Consider Roman generals who publicly lauded their enemy's strength before defeating them, elevating both their own triumph and their enemy's downfall. Or in corporate boardrooms where executives say, "We value our competitors' innovation," before launching a product that crushes them. There's a poetic quality to this strategy, but it's not sentiment. It's psychological mastery. Praise wraps the blade in velvet. It makes the strike seem necessary, not malicious. So next time you prepare to bring someone down, compliment them first. Sincerely, if you can. Convincingly, if you must. Let them relax into your words. Let the world admire your fairness. And then, with timing and clarity, make your move. They'll never see it coming, but everyone will see you as the better person, the smarter tactician, the inevitable victor. Be feared for your silence, not your words. Machiavelli knew the danger of noise. In politics, war, and power games, those who speak too much give away their position. But those who remain silent, deliberately, confidently, project mystery. And in the absence of certainty, people fear what they can't predict. Words reveal. Silence obscures. A bold statement may sound powerful, but it also invites challenge, debate, and eventual contradiction. Silence, however, provides no target, no opening. It becomes a vacuum others fill with their own fears, doubts, and assumptions. To be feared for your silence is to wield psychological power without effort. It's walking into a room, saying nothing, and still making people shift in their seats. It's responding to provocation with a calm stare instead of a reaction. The less you speak, the more your presence speaks for you. Why does this work? Because people interpret silence based on their own insecurities. When you don't respond to criticism, your enemy starts to wonder, did I go too far? Did they not notice? Or are they planning something? That uncertainty torments them. And the longer you hold your silence, the more power they project onto you, whether or not it's real. In a negotiation, silence after a proposal makes others uncomfortable. They talk more, revealing their position. In leadership, silence during conflict forces others to take responsibility. In confrontation, silence becomes a mirror, reflecting your opponent's instability, not yours. But make no mistake, this is not passive silence. This is strategic restraint. You're not staying quiet because you have nothing to say. You're staying quiet because you're controlling the emotional tempo of the situation. You're choosing stillness as a weapon. Machiavelli admired leaders who knew how to listen more than they spoke. He believed the best rulers kept their thoughts guarded and their plans hidden. They made others guess, and guessing leads to fear, because it removes control from the other party. It makes them reactive. Consider the most powerful figures in history. Many of them were not loud. They were composed, reserved. They didn't threaten. They paused. They didn't explain. They observed. Their silence became legendary. Their enemies were defeated not by words, but by anticipation. When you're silent, people often assume you're calm, calculating, dangerous. And that's the point. A loud threat can be dismissed. But a silent one lingers. It grows in the mind of the other person. It makes them watch you instead of you watching them. To be feared for your silence is to make others feel exposed in your presence, even when you haven't said a thing. That's not absence of power. That's pure control. Build myths around your leadership. Machiavelli understood that power isn't just earned, it's constructed. And one of the most enduring ways to maintain authority is to build a myth around yourself. Not a lie, exactly, but a narrative, a legend, something larger than truth that makes people believe in your destiny, your purpose, your inevitability. Because people don't follow raw logic, they follow belief, faith, emotion. They want to feel that they are part of something grand, something timeless, something fated. When you create a myth around your leadership, you stop being just a man or woman. You become a symbol. Great leaders in history were myth makers. Julius Caesar claimed descent from Venus. Napoleon surrounded himself with symbols of Roman glory. Even modern CEOs or political figures craft origin stories, humble beginnings, prophetic visions, divine timing. These stories don't have to be fully true. They just have to feel true. Why is this so effective? Because myths are sticky. They pass from person to person, generation to generation. They protect you from criticism. They exaggerate your victories. They explain away your mistakes as tests or setbacks on the path to greatness. A myth grants you immunity from ordinary judgment. You stop being judged by facts and start being judged by legend. Machiavelli understood that perception is power. A ruler who is seen as chosen by fate or history cannot be easily questioned. People may resist authority, but they rarely challenge destiny. And when you become larger than life, even your enemies hesitate. They begin to play the role of villain in your story, and the world watches accordingly. To build a myth, you must carefully craft your image. Associate yourself with symbols, flags, rituals, colors, values. Tell your story again and again with consistency and drama. Highlight moments of triumph. Downplay mistakes or recast them as trials of character. Create origin myths. Speak in visions, not just plans. But here's the deeper strategy. Let others tell your myth. Let loyal followers repeat your story until it becomes folklore. Let enemies mock it, which only makes it spread faster. Myths must live in the mouths of many to truly take hold. You are the author, but the world becomes your publisher. Building a myth isn't about ego, it's about architecture. You're constructing a fortress around your leadership, not with stone, but with belief. And belief is far harder to topple than facts. Because when people believe you're more than just a leader, when they believe you're a force, they don't just follow. They defend you like your destiny itself. Create confusion, then offer clarity. One of Machiavelli's most subtle but devastating strategies is to create confusion deliberately and then position yourself as the only one who can resolve it. This is classic psychological manipulation. You destabilize the environment, fracture people's understanding, overwhelm them with uncertainty, and then step forward as the calm, collected source of clarity. This tactic works because human beings hate uncertainty. We crave patterns, answers, and order. When faced with confusion, especially in high-stakes situations, people become mentally exhausted. They become impatient. They make mistakes. And most importantly, they look for someone to lead them out of the fog. That someone is you. Machiavelli saw this in the way rulers engineered problems just to solve them, or how they allowed minor chaos to unfold. So their intervention would be seen as necessary, even heroic. The confusion doesn't have to be dramatic. It could be miscommunication, delayed decisions, contradictory policies, or subtle changes that throw people off balance. The goal is disorientation. Once the confusion takes root, you introduce clarity, but only on your terms. You offer answers that reinforce your control. You create the structure. You define what's right. People don't question how the confusion started. They just feel grateful to have found a lifeline. This strategy is effective in everything from national politics to corporate boardrooms. A leader might implement vague policies or unclear priorities, creating stress and uncertainty. Teams start clashing. Progress slows. Then the leader steps in, introduces a clear vision, and everyone breathes a sigh of relief. They associate that relief with the leader's brilliance, not realizing the confusion was by design. Even in personal relationships, this dynamic can emerge. One person creates emotional uncertainty, silence, or contradiction. The other becomes anxious, unsure of where they stand. Then, suddenly, they receive affection or clarity, and the relief is so powerful it feels like love. But in reality, it's control. The power of this tactic lies in the contrast. Confusion sharpens the impact of clarity. The darker the fog, the brighter your lantern appears. That emotional shift is what makes people bond to you. They associate you with safety, sanity, and direction, even if you're the one who knocked them off course to begin with. But this must be handled with care. Too much chaos, and people rebel. Too little, and they don't feel the contrast. The key is balance. Just enough confusion to create need, just enough clarity to establish control. Because once people believe you are the one who makes sense of the madness, they stop questioning how the madness began. They just keep following your voice through the dark. Make small sacrifices to hide bigger gains. The art of deception, when mastered, often requires a paradoxical move. Willingly surrender something visible in order to protect what's hidden. Machiavelli understood that people are often fixated on what they can see and rarely question what lies beneath a controlled loss. That's why one of his most brilliant psychological warfare strategies is this: make small sacrifices to hide bigger gains. Imagine a powerful prince facing unrest. Instead of cracking down hard or exposing his long-term intentions, he offers the people a concession, perhaps lowering taxes slightly or removing an unpopular official. On the surface, it looks like a gesture of goodwill. In reality, it's a smokescreen. Behind it, the prince is consolidating power, forging secret alliances, or quietly removing threats. The effectiveness of this strategy lies in optics. Human beings are naturally drawn to short-term victories and visible events. When someone gives something up, we assume they've made a loss. We don't pause to ask whether what they kept was far more valuable than what they gave. In The Prince, Machiavelli doesn't spell this out directly, but the pattern is clear. His ideal ruler is someone who manipulates appearances, and sometimes that means taking a loss that costs very little but earns trust, sympathy, or distraction. He is constantly playing chess, sacrificing a pawn to save the queen. History offers countless examples. In business, a company might accept a public fine or a loss in one department while using that very event to restructure in a way that brings greater long-term profits. The public sees a stumble. The insiders know it was a calculated move to gain breathing room or change direction without scrutiny. In politics, a candidate might apologize for a minor scandal, drawing media attention to a controlled narrative while a much larger operation continues untouched in the background. The public sees humility. In truth, they've been redirected. This strategy also works personally. In negotiations, you might concede a point, deliberately, so that the other party feels they've won. But what they don't see is that the concession was pre-calculated, and in exchange, you've secured something far more important. The key to using this strategy effectively is understanding what your opponent values emotionally. Make your sacrifice in the area they care most about, even if it's meaningless to you. It will satisfy their sense of victory. Meanwhile, your true priorities remain untouched, or better, enhanced. And when the time is right, you can even use the memory of that sacrifice as leverage. "Remember what I gave up for you," you'll say, and they'll believe you were acting in good faith all along. In the Machiavellian sense, a ruler, or strategist, should never fear looking like they've lost a battle. If it protects the war, if it obscures the real prize, it's not a loss at all. It's misdirection at its finest. Turn loyalty into dependency. Loyalty is powerful, but dependency is absolute. A loyal person may change sides when fear, money, or ideology shifts. But someone who depends on you for protection, for power, for purpose, cannot afford to leave. This is the core of Machiavelli's strategy. Turn loyalty into dependency, and you'll never fear betrayal. In The Prince, he notes that generosity can create loyalty, but that kind of loyalty is fragile. It's tied to memory and emotion. What if they forget? What if someone else appears more generous? But dependency is different. It's not emotional. It's structural. A dependent person does not leave because they cannot. Their survival, reputation, or ambitions are tied to you like a lifeline. They may not love you, but they need you, and that need is what makes them predictable. Machiavelli's preferred rulers always kept their inner circle dependent, not merely grateful, trapped. Cesare Borgia gave land and titles to nobles, but only those who had no future without him. He ensured their prosperity was tethered to his own. If he fell, so did they. That's a bond far stronger than affection. In modern life, this happens everywhere. Think of how powerful managers in corporations mentor junior talent, but only in ways that make them indispensable to the mentor's system. Or how political figures give opportunities to allies who would collapse without the infrastructure provided. The trick to turning loyalty into dependency is subtle. You must first give. Offer resources, status, support. Make them feel empowered, but at the same time, close every exit door quietly. Make sure their success is increasingly linked to your favor, your systems, your reach. Let them rise, but only inside your walls. Dependency also creates self-policing loyalty. The dependent individual will suppress their doubts, justify your mistakes, and even attack your enemies, because they see your downfall as their own. You no longer have to enforce loyalty. They'll enforce it on themselves. But this strategy requires awareness. If you push too hard, it feels like control. If you're too generous, it becomes true loyalty. And loyalty can turn into rebellion when betrayed. The ideal is the middle ground, comfortable dependence. They thrive under your shadow, but know they can't survive in the sun alone. Once dependency is established, you can shape perception, dictate terms, and test loyalty without fear. They'll always return, not out of love, but out of necessity. And that's what Machiavelli valued, not admiration, but control that doesn't need constant enforcement. Because in the end, loyalty is a coin easily spent. But dependency? That's a chain. forged by need and nearly impossible to break. Use nostalgia to maintain control. Machiavelli may have lived centuries before the modern psychology of memory and emotion, but he instinctively understood one of its most manipulative forces: nostalgia. When people remember the past, they rarely recall it accurately. They remember emotionally, and those emotions, if stirred at the right moment, can be used to control them. Nostalgia has a calming effect. It paints the past in warm tones. The pain is dulled, the fear forgotten, and what remains is a longing for what once was. Leaders who understand this don't just remind people of the past, they weaponize it. In Discourses on Livy, Machiavelli discusses republics returning to their founding principles during times of crisis. What he's describing is nostalgia in a political form, when leaders summon the imagery and values of a golden age to secure power in the present. It works because nostalgia overrides logic. People don't analyze what the past really was. They cling to how it felt. And if you're the one invoking that feeling, you become associated with stability, with identity, with comfort. In uncertain times, that makes you indispensable. This tactic is everywhere in modern political life. Slogans like "Make country great again" or promises to return to traditional values are direct invocations of nostalgic control. The past becomes a tool, not to teach, but to shape allegiance. In business, legacy brands use this constantly. Vintage logos, classic designs, limited editions, all crafted to trigger emotional memory. Not because they're better products, but because they anchor people in feelings of certainty and familiarity. The power of nostalgia is especially strong in older audiences. As people age, they tend to idealize their youth, their struggles, their sense of place in the world. A Machiavellian leader or strategist can tap into that, creating loyalty not through promises of the future, but through reminders of the past. This works not only in public life, but in personal influence. Families, organizations, social groups all respond to nostalgic cues. Remember when things were simpler? We used to stand for something. These are emotional hooks, and they create cohesion and obedience without threats or logic. But nostalgia is also a trap for the one wielding it. You must know when to invoke it and when to let it go. If you rely on it too much, people notice the manipulation. If you invoke it too little, you miss the chance to anchor your authority in something sacred. The masterstroke is to create a new present that feels like the past. Make people believe they've returned to what they loved, even if the mechanisms have changed entirely. That's when nostalgia stops being a memory and starts becoming a strategic illusion. And in that illusion, you hold all the power. Let them underestimate you. It's a weapon. There is a distinct advantage in being underestimated. Machiavelli, ever the strategist, understood this deeply. When others think you're weaker, less intelligent, or less capable than you really are, they let their guard down. They reveal too much. They expose vulnerabilities. They assume they don't need to try as hard. And that's exactly when you strike. In The Prince, Machiavelli often praised deception, not in the crude sense of lying, but in the masterful sense of allowing others to believe a version of you that serves your long game. If people believe you're harmless, they don't defend themselves. If they believe you're naive, they show you their intentions. If they think you lack ambition, they don't watch you closely. You become invisible, but not powerless. Being underestimated gives you the luxury of time and freedom. You can observe without being watched. You can plan without interference. You can gather information, resources, and influence without triggering opposition. And when the moment comes, Your move is twice as powerful, not just because of the action itself, but because no one saw it coming. This strategy works especially well in environments dominated by ego. In politics, business, or social groups, many people thrive on being the smartest, the loudest, the most respected. Allow them the stage. Let them dominate the spotlight. Meanwhile, you're building behind the curtain. When they finally realize your power, it's not rising. It's already established. Even in personal relationships, this principle applies. Don't always correct those who underestimate you. Don't fight to prove your worth at every turn. Sometimes it's better to let others misjudge you. They become predictable in their arrogance, while you remain agile and underestimated, the most dangerous position in any conflict. To use this effectively, you must balance humility with hidden strength. Appear agreeable, even slow to respond. Avoid showing off. Ask questions that seem innocent. Let others talk. Let them think they're ahead. Meanwhile, every word they say gives you more leverage, and the less they see you as a threat, the more unguarded they become. But the ultimate power of this strategy isn't just surprise. It's control. When they finally realize what you're capable of, it's not a moment of admiration. It's a moment of regret. You've taken ground they thought was safe. You've outplayed them in a game they thought you didn't even understand. And by then it's too late. Underestimation isn't weakness. It's misdirection. And in the hands of a skilled operator, it's not a disadvantage. It's camouflage. Instill fear through calm, not rage. There's a reason silence unnerves people more than shouting. It's the reason a composed face during conflict is more terrifying than a red-faced outburst. Machiavelli understood that true fear is not created through chaos. It's forged through calm, calculated control. Rage is loud, emotional, and often sloppy. It may intimidate in the short term, but over time, it breeds defiance, even mockery. People learn how to navigate it, avoid it, or confront it. Rage is reactive, but calm, cold, intentional calm, is strategic. It says, I'm in control, I'm not rattled. I've already decided what's coming next. Fear born from calm is deeper. It's existential. When someone reacts without visible anger, it triggers something primal. People wonder what you're thinking. They feel they're in unfamiliar territory. If you're punished, corrected, or simply responded to without emotion, it makes your actions seem deliberate and therefore more dangerous. Think of a leader who fires someone with a quiet explanation and no raised voice. The calmness sends a message. This wasn't personal. It was planned. It implies you were measured and you fell short. That's more haunting than yelling. It lingers in the minds of others. If he can do that without emotion, what else is he capable of? This principle can be weaponized in conflict too. When someone insults you or provokes you and you respond with calm indifference, or worse, a knowing smile, it unnerves them. They expected a fight. They wanted a reaction. But your composure forces them to wonder what you know that they don't. Are you planning something? Are you confident because you've already won? Machiavelli would argue that calm is the outer layer of control. It tells the world, I am not at your mercy. I move when I choose, not when you push. Rage is often a sign of insecurity. Calm, when maintained under pressure, becomes a silent dominance. This doesn't mean you never show emotion. It means you show emotion with purpose. If you display anger, it should be a tool, not a leak, something you control, not something that controls you. And the moment you realize people fear your restraint more than your wrath, you'll understand how deep your influence has become. Fear through calm is sustainable. It doesn't exhaust you. It doesn't invite rebellion. It creates an atmosphere where people self-regulate, second-guess, and seek to stay in your good graces, not because they fear your rage, but because they fear your silence. Control access to your presence. Scarcity breeds respect. Machiavelli taught that power is not just about what you say or do. It's also about where you are, how often you're seen, and who gets access to you. In any social structure, the more available someone is, the more ordinary they seem. But when access is rare, when your presence feels exclusive, it commands attention, curiosity, and respect. Humans instinctively value what's scarce. It's basic psychology. When someone is always available, they become part of the scenery, reliable but unremarkable. When someone disappears for periods of time and returns with intention, their presence carries weight. People listen more closely. They attribute greater meaning to their words. The same sentence spoken by someone who's always around sounds different when said by someone you rarely see. Machiavelli understood that a prince, or any leader, should be seen enough to maintain loyalty, but not so frequently that familiarity leads to contempt. He even warned that being too accessible opens the door for manipulation, flattery, and casual disrespect. When you control access, you control the flow of influence. You make people earn your time, and in doing so, increase its perceived value. This applies in all walks of life. In business, a CEO who makes themselves too available is eventually seen as a colleague rather than a leader. In personal relationships, being constantly at someone's beck and call erodes mystique. Even in friendships, when one person is always available, the dynamic shifts, often toward imbalance or exploitation. But when you limit access strategically, something changes. People anticipate your words more. They weigh your attention as a form of approval. They work harder to impress, to reach, to maintain your interest. In this way, you reverse the power dynamic. You're not chasing attention. They are. To use this effectively, you must balance presence with absence. Vanish too long, and people may move on. Appear too often, and you become noise. The ideal is calculated scarcity. Show up at pivotal moments. Speak when silence has built tension. Offer insight when others are lost in confusion. Your timing becomes part of your power. This also allows you to curate your reputation. When people don't see you often, they begin to fill in the blanks with imagination, often idealizing your intelligence, strength, or wisdom far beyond what you actually reveal. That illusion is a powerful force, one you can cultivate through rare, deliberate engagement. So ask yourself, how often do people hear from you, and when? Do they lean in when you speak? Have you trained others to value your time or to expect it? Scarcity isn't just about withdrawing. It's about being selective with your energy. When people believe your presence is earned, not given, they respect it. And in that respect, you solidify the very power that others so carelessly give away. Use doubt to make others question their plans. One of the most effective weapons in Machiavellian strategy is doubt. Not loud, obvious doubt, but quiet, creeping uncertainty. When your enemy or a competitor is full of confidence, they are dangerous. But if you can make them question even one small part of their plan, their judgment, their support, their timing, you begin to dismantle them without ever having to confront them directly. Doubt is corrosive. It eats away at certainty. And Machiavelli knew that a person who is unsure is easier to manipulate, delay, distract, or defeat. Why? Because doubt slows action. It fractures unity. It creates hesitation. And hesitation is the enemy of power. This strategy works best when it's subtle. You don't confront someone with "you're wrong." That would trigger defensiveness. Instead, you plant questions. Small, believable, emotionally resonant questions. You ask, "Are you sure your allies are fully committed?" Or, "Have you considered what happens if that doesn't work out?" These aren't attacks, they're whispers. But once whispered, they echo. You don't need them to believe you. You only need them to wonder. And here's where the brilliance lies. Most people are already harboring some level of insecurity about their plan, their team, their own capability. You're not inventing fear, you're magnifying what already exists. Use rumors, use silence, use friendly advice. Even a pause at the right moment, a raised eyebrow, or a well-placed "I see" can signal that something is off. And once that seed is planted, they will begin watering it themselves. Doubt also spreads. If you can cause one influential person in a group to hesitate, they may begin to influence others with their uncertainty. This can lead to fragmentation, and a fragmented enemy is far easier to defeat than a united one. Timing is critical. The closer your enemy is to executing a plan, the more dangerous it becomes to let them proceed without disruption. But if you can inject just enough doubt at the right moment, perhaps the eve of an announcement, a merger, a campaign, you can derail months of preparation with a few well-placed shadows. And remember, you don't have to offer an alternative. You don't need to say, "Do this instead." That would give them clarity. You want to leave them suspended, questioning their original plan without the comfort of a new one. That vacuum of certainty weakens them, and you stay in control. Machiavelli would say, "Better to shake the mind than strike the body." When they lose belief in their own direction, they'll follow someone else's, maybe yours. Dominate before you negotiate. Before a single word is spoken in a negotiation, the outcome is often already shaped, not by logic or compromise, but by power dynamics. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. That's why he taught, never enter a negotiation as an equal. Enter it as the one who already controls the terrain. Negotiation is a performance, a psychological game, and to win it, you must first establish dominance, not through aggression, but through posture, silence, presence, and positioning. You must make the other side feel that they are negotiating up, not across. The most dangerous mistake people make is believing that negotiation begins at the table. It doesn't. It begins with how you are perceived before you even arrive. Reputation, rumor, aura, these are the tools that set expectations. If people expect you to be hard to move, they will offer more just to avoid conflict. If they think you're desperate, they'll offer scraps. So, how do you dominate before negotiating? First, control your reputation. Be known as someone who is not afraid to walk away, someone whose alliances are strong, someone who is calm but unforgiving. Build this image before you ever need to sit down. Second, use silence and space. Don't respond immediately to proposals. Let them sit. Make the other party anxious. Delay meetings. Make them come to you. Even small moves, like controlling the environment of a conversation, send subtle signals about who's in control. Third, use early signals of strength. Before discussing terms, speak with confidence. Reference your other options. Mention the cost of delay. For them, not for you. Make it clear that you are granting them an audience, not begging for one. Then, when the negotiation begins, anchor the frame, set the tone, define the terms. Ask the first question, or better yet, make the first demand. People instinctively respond to the opening narrative. If you start strong, you force them to negotiate around your reality. The final piece? Don't reveal your true needs. The more others know what you want, the more leverage they gain. Keep your desires hidden and your boundaries high. Let them wonder how far they can push without ever knowing the limit. When you dominate before you negotiate, you force the other side into a defensive posture. They're not coming to the table to win. They're coming to not lose. And that subtle shift changes everything. Machiavelli would remind you, better to appear immovable than persuasive. Once they see you won't bend, they'll move themselves. force others to choose between bad and worse. One of the darkest, but most effective at Machiavellian strategies is to present people with only two options, bad or worse. When you do this, you manipulate perception. You make people believe they still have control, when in fact you've already cornered them. This is what's known as a false choice, a psychological trap disguised as freedom. People fear uncertainty. They avoid chaos. And when faced with a situation where both options feel unpleasant, they will almost always choose the one that appears to have the least risk, even if it still benefits you more than them. The key is in the framing. For example, if you want someone to accept your authority, don't say, "Do what I say or else." That triggers rebellion. Instead, you say, "You can either work with me and keep your position, or oppose me and face instability." You're not asking. You're forcing a calculation. This tactic works because people don't compare your offer to what they want. They compare it to what they fear. And if the second option is scarier than the first, they'll rationalize the first as reasonable, even wise. That's how you gain submission disguised as consent. Machiavelli used this in politics, where populations could be steered by fear. Offer them continued taxation under your rule, or rebellion and civil war. They'll grumble, but they'll stay. Because when fear outweighs anger, people will tolerate almost anything. This strategy also works in negotiation, leadership, even parenting. You don't offer unlimited freedom. You offer two doors, one with consequences, the other with conditions. They'll feel they chose freely, but in truth, you narrowed their options from the start. But here's where finesse matters. You must make both options feel real. If they sense manipulation, if they see the trick, the tactic fails. They'll resist not the choice, but the insult to their intelligence. So both doors must feel believable, both outcomes must carry weight. And your preferred option must feel like the lesser evil, not the trap. This strategy isn't about cruelty. It's about control. If used ethically, it can help people take necessary actions they'd otherwise avoid. If abused, it becomes tyranny. Machiavelli never flinched from either possibility. He simply asked, "What secures your power?" When someone chooses your option, thinking it was their own idea, you haven't just won the moment. You've trained them to surrender in the future, and that's a victory far greater than mere obedience. Withdraw approval suddenly to trigger obedience. Human beings crave approval. From early childhood to late adulthood, we are psychologically conditioned to seek signs of validation. A nod, a smile, a gesture of acceptance. Machiavelli knew this well. And he understood something even more potent. The strategic withdrawal of approval can control people more effectively than punishment or praise. This strategy plays on one of the deepest human fears, social rejection. When someone we admire or depend on withdraws their approval without explanation, a sudden cold shoulder, a withheld compliment, or a change in tone, it creates psychological dissonance. The mind races. What did I do wrong? How do I fix it? In that frantic mental space, people become far more compliant, eager to regain what they've lost. Unlike direct confrontation, which may provoke resistance or defensiveness, silent disapproval operates under the skin. It causes self-correction. People begin to moderate their own behavior without you having to issue commands. And this is precisely the point. True power isn't forcing obedience. It's causing people to choose it out of fear of losing favor. Machiavelli would recommend you use this tactic sparingly, but with precision. Be warm, generous, approving. Let others bask in your favor. Build a pattern of consistent reinforcement. Then, without warning, remove it. Let them feel the absence. Do not explain. The lack of clarity is what drives the psychological pressure. They won't know if they crossed a line or fell short, only that something shifted. This can be applied in leadership, mentorship, parenting, or any relationship where influence matters. Imagine a manager who always gives feedback suddenly stops commenting on someone's work. The silence isn't just unsettling, it becomes the loudest voice in the room. The employee begins to double-check every action, trying to reverse the withdrawal. You haven't demanded better behavior, you've provoked it. There's an art to this. Too frequent or too obvious, and people catch on. They may grow resentful or call your bluff. But done occasionally, and with emotional distance, it becomes a powerful tool. The key is in timing. Withdraw approval right after someone begins to test boundaries, slack off, or challenge your influence. The message is clear but unspoken. I'm watching, and you've disappointed me. This strategy also flips the power dynamic. When you control approval, you control worth. If people learn that their emotional comfort is tied to your judgment, they will work to protect it. That's not manipulation. It's psychological conditioning. In the end, this is less about cruelty and more about leverage. People don't fear criticism nearly as much as they fear disconnection. Approval is a currency. Give it generously, but know exactly when to pull it back. And when you do, watch how quickly obedience returns. Let your rivals talk while you watch and plan. Machiavelli believed in action, yes, but more importantly, in timing. And sometimes the most strategic action is inaction. One of the most powerful tactics in psychological warfare is simple but devastatingly effective. Let your rivals talk, while you stay silent and plan. Why is this so effective? Because people reveal everything when they're trying to prove something. Their ego pushes them to fill silences, to showcase intelligence, strength, influence. In that overexposure, they become predictable and vulnerable. Meanwhile, you remain a mystery. Unknown. Still, and nothing is more unnerving than someone who watches without reacting. Machiavelli observed that insecure or ambitious men, particularly in positions of proximity to power, talk too much. They overshare their strategies. They name their allies. They telegraph their intentions. Why? Because they want to be noticed. They want affirmation. They want to be seen as strong. But in doing so, they hand over their playbook. You, on the other hand, say little. You nod. You observe. You let them think they're winning the psychological battle by dominating the room. All the while, you're collecting information. Who's aligned with whom? What motivates them? Where they're overconfident. You're mapping the battlefield while they're still parading on it. This strategy requires discipline. Most people feel pressure to respond, to clarify, to defend, but silence is not weakness. It's an act of control. When you don't react, you place doubt in your rival's mind. Why aren't they responding? Do they know something I don't? That doubt grows. They second-guess themselves, and a rival who is unsure of themselves is a rival you've already started to defeat. In negotiation, this tactic is lethal. While your opponent outlines their terms, just listen. Don't rush to counter. Let the silence stretch. People hate silence. They fill it with concessions. By simply listening, you gain more leverage than any rebuttal could deliver. Letting rivals talk also reveals their emotional temperature. Are they arrogant? Desperate? Trying to impress someone? Their tone, their choice of words, their pauses, all are signals. And those signals are the data you'll use when it's finally time to move. You'll strike not randomly, but precisely, where they didn't even know they were weak. Remember, Machiavelli never recommended foolish patience. This isn't about passivity. It's about strategic waiting. You don't speak until you can say something that ends the conversation or wins the war. Until then, let them perform. Let them, overextend. Let them think the silence means nothing is happening. Because by the time they realize the trap was laid during their own monologue, it's already too late. Punish betrayal with unforgettable force. Machiavelli made one thing very clear: betrayal must never go unanswered. And more importantly, it must never be forgettable. When someone turns against you, undermines your authority, or stabs you in the back, the response must be swift, public, and so severe that it echoes beyond the act itself. Not out of revenge, but as a lesson to everyone watching. In Machiavellian logic, the purpose of punishing betrayal is twofold. First, to neutralize the traitor. Second, to warn all others. If your punishment is too soft or too private, others may believe they can get away with similar actions. But if your response is dramatic, symbolic even, it sends a message. This will not be tolerated, and the price is high. This isn't about cruelty for cruelty's sake. It's about reinforcing order. Betrayal, left unchecked, breeds more betrayal. People test boundaries. They observe how others are treated. If disloyalty is met with forgiveness or hesitation, those under your rule start to wonder if they too can defect without consequences. That's when the cracks begin. History offers countless examples. Roman emperors who survived plots didn't just execute the conspirators. They made public examples of them. Heads on spikes, public trials, forced confessions. Not to appease bloodlust, but to create psychological shockwaves. These acts weren't just justice. They were deterrence. In a modern context, this doesn't mean literal violence, but it does mean visible consequence. If someone betrays your trust, your leadership, or your alliance, do not respond quietly. Remove them from favor. Expose their dishonesty. Make the punishment part of the story others repeat. Not because you're vindictive, but because you're calculating. And here's the deeper strategy. Make the punishment feel personalized. The traitor should feel like the punishment fits not just the act, but the audacity of what they attempted. Did they try to humiliate you publicly? Then their fall should be public too. Did they quietly sabotage your plans? Then strip them of their influence, their connections, and make their absence felt louder than their presence ever was. But never act in rage. Punishment loses its power when it looks emotional. Instead, act with calm finality. That cold precision makes the response even more terrifying. When others see that betrayal is met not with ranting, but with surgical discipline, they understand you are not to be tested. And perhaps most importantly, never forgive publicly what undermines your authority. Forgiveness has its place, but betrayal is not a mistake. It's a choice, and choices have consequences. Because in Machiavellian warfare, people only respect the rules when they fear the price of breaking them. Make sure that price is carved deep into memory. Reward loyalty only when it's useful. In Machiavelli's cold but clear-eyed view of power, loyalty is not a virtue to be rewarded simply for its presence. It's a tool. A leader should reward loyalty not as a gesture of gratitude or morality, but only when it serves a strategic function. If a reward does not reinforce power, secure influence, or deepen dependence, it's wasted. This mindset cuts directly against the emotional impulse most people have. When someone shows devotion, we feel an urge to thank them, to give back, sometimes even to overcompensate. But Machiavelli warns, rewarding loyalty too freely cheapens it. It creates a sense of entitlement. It tells others that simply being loyal is enough. That's dangerous, because it invites opportunists who mimic loyalty just to extract benefits. Instead, the reward must be calculated. Ask, what does this loyalty do for me right now? Will rewarding it secure something I need? Protection, silence, alliance, information? Will it increase their dependence on me? Will others see the reward and adjust their own behavior accordingly? If the answer is no, hold back. Let's say you have a follower who's been publicly defending you during political tension. Their loyalty is valuable because it shields your image and keeps your allies intact. In this case, rewarding them with access, a favor, or some symbolic gesture serves to reinforce that behavior and signals to others that useful loyalty is recognized. But if someone has been quietly loyal for years without leverage, power, or influence, rewarding them may actually be counterproductive. You gain nothing but the appearance of being sentimental. Worse, it could send a signal that loyalty without results is enough to win favor. The most effective rewards are ones that deepen dependency. Machiavelli would suggest offering just enough to make the loyal subject feel privileged while still leaving them slightly unsatisfied. This creates a cycle where the person continues to serve, hoping for more. It keeps them engaged and under control. Also, consider publicity. Sometimes the reward should be visible, a strategic message to others that says, "Loyalty with results is how you rise here." But at other times, it should be private, a whispered promise, a secret favor, to avoid inflating the recipient's ego or status too much. Finally, don't confuse loyalty with affection. People can be loyal out of fear, habit, or opportunism. True power lies not in inspiring blind devotion, but in making sure that devotion profits you. That's the Machiavellian calculus. Reward loyalty only when it strengthens your position. Not before, not out of guilt, not because it feels right. Just because someone offers their hand doesn't mean you need to shake it, unless it holds something you need. Keep people slightly anxious. Comfort dulls submission. Machiavelli understood that total comfort breeds complacency, and complacency is the enemy of control. If people feel too safe, too certain, too relaxed under your rule or leadership, they begin to think independently. They start imagining life without you. They challenge rules. They get lazy, entitled, or worse, rebellious. That's why one of the most enduring strategies of psychological warfare is this: keep people slightly anxious, not terrified. That's unsustainable, but just unsettled enough that they never fully relax. That tension, that unease, is what makes them look to you for cues, direction, and stability. You become the source of calm they can't produce on their own. In other words, you manufacture dependency. The art is in subtlety. You don't threaten people directly. You don't scream or rule with open violence. Instead, you inject controlled unpredictability. Change routines without warning. Delay decisions. Be warm one day and distant the next. Show approval rarely and never too enthusiastically. Keep them wondering, did I do something wrong? Am I still in good standing? What do they think of me now? This anxiety creates a psychological loop. People begin to anticipate your needs, tiptoe around your moods, try harder to impress you, not because they fear punishment, but because they crave the return of comfort. That comfort becomes a reward only you can grant, and they begin to chase it. It's a modern form of operant conditioning. Reward, withhold, reward again. Enough to keep people obedient without realizing they're being conditioned. In workplaces, this strategy often appears in leaders who rarely give full praise. They'll recognize a win with a nod, then quickly raise the bar again. They avoid predictability. Their teams work harder, driven by the anxiety of trying to finally please the boss. In relationships, this tactic appears when one partner alternates between affection and detachment, keeping the other off balance and emotionally tethered. Machiavelli would say that a little fear is a powerful leash. But fear doesn't have to be terror. It can be the fear of losing approval, influence, or access. That kind of fear drives far deeper loyalty than blind love ever could. You become, psychologically, the thermostat. When you pull back, they feel cold. When you offer brief warmth, they light up. You control the emotional climate, and thus you control them. So don't aim to make people feel safe in your presence. Aim to make them feel like they need you to feel safe. That's a difference only the cunning understand. Comfort them when it benefits you, but always keep just enough uncertainty in the air that they never forget who controls the atmosphere. Make your power look effortless. One of the most mesmerizing traits of a truly powerful person is that they never seem to be trying too hard. Their authority flows naturally. Their words carry weight without raising their voice. Their presence demands respect before they even speak. Machiavelli recognized this as a form of psychological warfare in itself, the ability to make your power look effortless. Why? Because effortless power intimidates. It suggests that your strength comes not from force, desperation, or manipulation, but from something deeper. It implies that power is your default state. People trust and fear what seems natural. If they see you struggle to hold power, they'll question your fitness to keep it. But if you appear calm, composed, and in control, even during crisis, they assume you're made for it. This appearance doesn't come from luck. It comes from discipline, restraint, and strategy. It comes from preparing behind closed doors but executing with grace under pressure. You don't show how hard you're working. You show only the result, and let others imagine what lies beneath. Take the example of a CEO walking into a boardroom. If they look frantic, overly enthusiastic, or anxious to prove their worth, they signal insecurity. But the CEO who walks in slowly, speaks clearly, listens more than they talk, and ends with a calm, unshakable decision, that person is feared, followed, and rarely questioned. In Machiavellian terms, this is about controlling the performance of leadership. Think of power like stagecraft. The audience shouldn't see the wires, the crew, or the sweat backstage. They should see only the illusion, polished, powerful, seamless. This also ties to your emotional discipline. Don't overreact. Don't get drawn into petty arguments. Don't gossip, whine, or blame. These things make your power look fragile. The moment you start defending yourself emotionally, people start to doubt you. Your greatest strength is to remain unmoved, even when others expect you to break. Effortless power also means not overcompensating. You don't need to constantly remind people of your status. You don't need loud clothes, louder opinions, or theatrical decisions. The most commanding figure in the room is often the quietest one, because they don't need to prove anything. And here's the final twist. People will project their own fears and fantasies onto someone who seems naturally powerful. They'll imagine you're wiser, more dangerous, or more resourceful than you might be. Why? Because you give them no signals to disprove it. You remain composed, and in that vacuum of emotion, they fill in the legend. So Machiavelli would say, train in secret, plan meticulously, sharpen your weapons. But when the curtain rises, step into the light with a steady hand and a still face. Let your enemies scramble, shout, and sweat. You just smile, as if it's always been this easy. Use rituals to anchor control in tradition. Rituals aren't just ceremonial, they're psychological anchors. Machiavelli understood that if you want people to accept power, submit to hierarchy, or follow without question, you don't always need reason. You need rhythm, repetition, a sense that what's happening has always happened and should happen. Rituals do this. They strip events of randomness and embed them in the fabric of tradition. Whether it's a military salute, a corporate meeting format, a political inauguration, or religious ceremony, rituals are acts of repetition that reinforce a structure of power. They make authority feel natural, even sacred. When people participate in ritual, they're not just following a leader. They're entering a story, a tradition, something that existed before them and will exist after them. This creates emotional insulation, because challenging the ritual isn't just challenging the leader, it's challenging history, and few people are bold enough to do that. Machiavelli admired rulers who used rituals to root their rule into the collective psyche of their subjects. Take the Roman emperors who staged public games, sacrifices, and parades, not just for entertainment, but to remind the people who was in charge, and to wrap that power in grandeur and order. Or religious rulers who infused divine symbolism into everyday acts of governance. Rituals turned obedience into reverence. Even in modern life, rituals dominate. From corporate onboarding sessions to political town halls to school assemblies. They may seem routine, but they serve a deeper purpose: to create consistency, to bind people to a shared reality, and to reinforce who sits where in the hierarchy. Ritual also reduces resistance. People may object to change, but they rarely object to tradition, especially if it's wrapped in culture or identity. A leader who creates new rituals and embeds them in existing traditions is not seen as innovating, but as preserving, and preservation always feels safer than disruption. To apply this strategy effectively, design rituals that serve two goals: structure and symbolism. Structure creates predictability. People know what to expect. Symbolism gives emotional depth. People feel connected to something bigger. For example, a CEO might begin every company meeting with a story of a past success. Over time, this ritual becomes a symbol of vision, continuity, and mission. It's not just a meeting, it's a reminder. Rituals also act as filters. Those who resist or disrespect them often expose themselves as outsiders, rebels, or threats. This allows you to identify disloyalty without direct confrontation. Machiavelli would argue that when people repeat an act often enough, especially under authority, they stop questioning it. They absorb it. It becomes truth through tradition. And when tradition becomes the language of power, you don't have to justify your control. You just perform it, and let the ritual speak for you. Maintain mystery. People fear what they don't understand. If knowledge is power, then mystery is fear. Machiavelli believed that the more people understand you, the more they can predict, manipulate, and challenge you. But when you remain an enigma, quiet, unreadable, and unexpected, you generate unease. That unease becomes control. People crave clarity. It gives them a sense of security and direction. But when you withhold that clarity, when you act in ways they can't fully decode, they become cautious, paranoid, dependent on interpretation. This is the power of mystery. It creates a psychological fog where others second-guess their own instincts, and you become the one unpredictable variable they can't prepare for. Machiavelli wrote about this indirectly through his admiration for leaders who used unpredictability to gain the upper hand. Cesare Borgia, one of his key examples, was feared not just for what he did, but for what people thought he might do. That anticipation was more powerful than action itself. To maintain mystery, you must control what others see, and more importantly, what they don't. Share selectively. Speak less. Avoid over-explaining. Allow moments of silence. If you're questioned, respond with questions. If you're attacked, delay your response. If you make a move, make it hard to interpret. Let others connect dots that don't exist. Their own paranoia will do more work than your strategy ever could. This also applies to emotions. When others cannot read your emotional state, whether you're angry, pleased, or indifferent, they become tentative, unsure how to behave. That uncertainty drives compliance. A mysterious leader forces people to monitor themselves, constantly guessing what will earn approval or trigger punishment. Mystery also makes you appear deeper, more intelligent, and more dangerous than you may be. Because people tend to fill in gaps with their fears or desires. If they don't know your plan, they'll imagine a brilliant one. If they don't know your next move, they'll assume it's devastating. The less you reveal, the more powerful you seem. In business, this can look like not rushing to respond to competition. In politics, it might be vague speeches that allow for multiple interpretations. In personal relationships, it can be strategic silence, measured praise, or unpredictability in affection, all tactics that keep the other party emotionally invested and slightly off balance. But the key is balance. Mystery must never feel like absence. You're not invisible, you're just unreadable. Present but unknowable. That is when mystery becomes fear, and fear becomes obedience. Because when people don't understand you, they can't control you. They can only submit to the possibility of what you might become. Surround yourself with people who owe you. Machiavelli believed loyalty was never about love or shared vision. It was about debt. Gratitude, he argued, fades quickly, but obligation has a long memory. So if you want power that lasts, don't surround yourself with people who admire you. Surround yourself with people who owe you. People who owe you for their status, their survival, their income, or their second chances are far less likely to betray you. Why? Because they are invested in your success. If you fall, they fall with you. That dependency becomes the leash, and the tighter the debt, the shorter their range of movement. This is how kings used to secure loyalty from nobles. They'd grant lands, titles, or privileges, not out of generosity, but to bind the nobles to their throne. As long as their power came from the king, they'd protect it. The same happens today in corporations, governments, and even friendships. If someone's rise is tied to your hand, their loyalty becomes self-preservation. But this strategy requires careful execution. You must give strategically, just enough to uplift someone, but never enough for them to stand without you. You want them to succeed, but not outgrow you. You want their fate linked to yours. That way, helping you is helping themselves. Betraying you would mean sabotaging their own security. You also must remind people of their debts, not with threats, but with subtle reinforcement. A favor returned, a well-timed gesture, a public acknowledgement of how you elevated them. This keeps the psychological hook in place. They remember what they owe, and more importantly, they remember who gave it to them. However, be cautious. Those who rise without your help often grow arrogant. They may see you as a rival. They have nothing to lose by opposing you. That's why Machiavelli warned against empowering those you did not create. If they don't owe you, they may eventually seek to replace you. This is not about cruelty. It's about architecture. You are designing a circle of people who protect your interests because your fall would mean their fall. This is the web of obligation, sticky, invisible, and nearly impossible to escape once someone is caught in it. Surround yourself with those whose fortunes rise when yours do, and whose decline would mirror yours. That's not friendship. That's insurance. Because in the end, loyalty built on gratitude is optional, but loyalty built on debt is permanent and far harder to break. Shape belief, and you'll shape reality. Machiavelli understood something few rulers grasped until centuries later. Reality is not fixed. It is filtered through belief. If you can control what people believe, you don't have to control what is. Belief bends perception. Perception becomes action, and action shapes the world. In short, shape belief, and you shape reality. Most people think reality is objective. What happens is what's true. But in power dynamics, truth is often irrelevant. What matters is the version of the truth people believe. A weak economy can feel strong if people believe in the leader. A poor general can be seen as brilliant if his failures are reframed as strategy. A manipulator can be worshipped as a visionary. all depending on what people choose to believe. And belief isn't formed by facts. It's formed by repetition, emotion, symbolism, and timing. Machiavelli knew that stories beat statistics. People don't follow because of spreadsheets. They follow because of narrative. If you tell them they're part of something noble, under threat, or chosen for greatness, they'll believe it and act accordingly. This is how religion, nationalism, and political movements take root, not by proving they are true, but by making people feel they are true. Once belief is installed, it becomes harder to challenge than any army. As a leader, your job is not to reflect the world. It's to shape the lens through which others see it. Frame failures as learning. Frame delays as strategy. Frame opposition as jealousy. If people believe your version, then your version becomes the only reality that matters. To do this, you must understand the emotional landscape of your audience. What are they afraid of? What do they hope for? What do they want to be true? Then deliver that belief, wrapped in logic, but powered by feeling. Belief is contagious. Once a few believe, others follow. And dissenters are dismissed not as correct, but as heretics or cynics. This social proof locks belief into culture, and culture enforces it more brutally than any leader could. Machiavelli saw this in religion, in political myth, in royal propaganda. But it applies everywhere. Even in business, the belief that a company is innovative or moral can outweigh clear evidence to the contrary. That belief drives investment, loyalty, and momentum. Because people don't act on truth. They act on what they believe is true. Shape that belief, and the world will follow your script.